Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never expected to stumble on an abandoned party hall while wandering around a small town. I was just looking for interesting places to photograph, hoping I might find an old building or a quiet corner with a unique style. Instead, I found a large, decaying structure with broken windows and faded paint. Something about its entrance, with tall doors and worn-out details, made me curious enough to push on the heavy wood and see if it would open. It did without much resistance, and the sight of the ornate interior took my breath away. Even before I stepped inside, I felt my stomach tighten in anticipation, like something was waiting for me on the other side. I entered and let the door close behind me. The hinges squeaked and dust floated in the air. I noticed the floor right away. Dark wood under a layer of dirt and debris. There were scattered leaves and scraps of paper. Everything smelled musty, but not overwhelmingly. In front of me, a hallway stretched out, lined with ornate sconces on the walls. The lights were off, and I assumed there was no electricity. Some of the sconces were cracked, and a few had fallen to the floor, but I could still see the craftsmanship in their curling metal designs. I moved forward, stepping carefully, trying not to make too much noise. My shoes made a soft echo on the wood. Each step seemed louder in my ears than it probably was in reality. I kept looking around. At first, I just saw more dust and damage, but then I noticed the chandeliers further down the hall. They were bigger than anything I'd seen in a typical house. They looked like the kind of chandeliers you'd see in an old hotel or a fancy theater. Even with layers of grime, they were impressive. The crystals caught the faint light from outside and created small sparkles. I looked to my left and saw a large mirror on the wall. Its frame had carved details of flowers and leaves. The mirror itself was cracked in one corner, but most of it was intact. When I caught my own reflection, I felt a jolt of excitement. It felt like I was stepping into a forgotten era, even though I was just wearing jeans and a jacket. I got the sense that people had once paraded up and down this hallway in formal attire, maybe holding glasses of champagne. I kept walking until I reached a pair of double doors at the end. They were taller than me, and had dusty glass panels that were hard to see through. I placed my hand on the handle, hesitated for a second, then pushed. The doors made a dull thud as they swung inward. Then I stood in a massive ballroom. Or at least it looked like a ballroom to me. The ceiling soared high, and there were multiple chandeliers up there, all matching the ones in the hallway but grander. The floor was made of polished wood panels, and I could tell it had been well maintained at one time. Now it looked scratched, but still somewhat shiny. Along the walls, there were tall mirrors in ornate frames. Some had fallen, but many still clung to the plaster. The walls themselves had patterns of faded gold and silver paint. I heard a faint rustling, like a breeze moving through the room, but the windows were all closed as far as I could see. My heart pounded and I swallowed hard. I felt a chill on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me, but I saw no one. I took a few cautious steps toward the center of the room, trying to see if there was anything else inside. Tables, chairs, or decorations. Something that would explain why this place was abandoned but still decorated. The chandeliers were still there, and so were the mirrors. I wondered why nobody had come to strip them out or salvage them. They looked expensive. I stood still for a moment and listened. My own breathing sounded loud. The rustling sound happened again, like a gentle gust, and I felt it on my face. The air was cool, and it made me shiver. Then, all of a sudden, I saw a faint glow in the chandeliers. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of daylight, but it intensified. I watched in disbelief as the crystals lit up, one by one, in a soft, golden light. The electric bulbs, assuming they were bulbs, appeared to turn on, but I knew there was no electricity. I took a step back, staring, trying to rationalize it. My heart started racing faster, and I felt a tingling in my arms and hands. I glanced around, looking for a generator or some hidden wiring, but I saw nothing. The chandelier light grew brighter, but it didn't look blinding. It was just enough to make the room glow. Then I heard a faint hum, like distant music that you can't quite make out. I turned my head from side to side, trying to figure out if it was coming from inside or outside. It sounded like it might be a waltz, but it was so soft I wasn't sure. My eyes landed on the mirrors along the walls and I noticed movement in them. At first I thought it was me, but the figures I saw were dressed in formal gowns and suits. They were dancing in slow, graceful circles. I could see the swirl of the gowns and the polished shoes gliding across a clean, shiny floor, but the actual floor under my feet was dusty and scratched, so I knew I was seeing something that shouldn't be there. My mouth went dry. I felt my hands shaking. I took a step closer to one of the mirrors, needing to see if it was some trick of light or an old movie projector. But as I approached, the dancers in the reflection kept moving. Their eyes were focused on their partners and their steps were coordinated. Nobody looked at me, at least not right then. I leaned in closer, my nose just inches from the glass. I could still see my own reflection, but behind me in the mirror's image, the ballroom looked pristine. The walls had fresh paint, the floor was spotless, and couples circled around me, ignoring my presence. It was like I was standing in a different version of the same room. A few seconds passed, and then I noticed one dancer turn her head, as if sensing me. Her eyes locked on mine through the mirror. My chest tightened, and I froze. I watched her tilt her head slightly. It wasn't threatening, but it felt like a silent invitation. Then she turned back to her partner and kept moving. I glanced at my own reflection and I almost jumped back. My clothing had changed. In the mirror, I wasn't wearing jeans and a jacket anymore. I had on a formal suit with a waistcoat and my hair was styled in an old-fashioned way. I grabbed at my jacket in real life, but it was still my modern jacket. In the mirror, though, it was something completely different. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My breathing grew rapid and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. I stepped away from the mirror, shaking my head, trying to clear my thoughts. The chandelier light still glowed overhead, and the soft hum of music was more pronounced now. I could almost make out the melody. I looked around, and every mirror showed these couples dancing. Some had their eyes closed, some smiled at each other, and some were just staring forward, focusing on their steps. I thought about leaving, but something kept me there. I was too curious. I wanted to see what else might happen. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to walk to another mirror. The reflection was the same kind of scene. People dancing, dressed like they came from a past era. Then I spotted myself again, standing alone in that old-fashioned suit. This time, I lifted my hand in reality, and I watched as my reflection did the same. The difference was that my reflection's hand was gloved, and it had a slight tremor. Then a strange sense of pressure filled the room. I felt like the air was thicker. My ears popped and I stumbled. I reached out to steady myself against a pillar. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. Then I felt that breeze again, but stronger this time. My hair moved and dust swirled around my feet. A door somewhere behind me slammed shut on its own. The sudden noise made me jump and I nearly lost my footing. After a few moments, the pressure eased. I stood up straight and wiped the sweat off my face with my sleeve. I looked around, and for a few seconds the mirrors showed nothing but my own reflection in a dusty ballroom. The dancers were gone. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a brief sense of relief. But then, just as quickly, the figures returned. They faded in, like someone was adjusting the brightness on a TV screen. They began dancing again, the same silent waltz with that faint hum of music in the background. My reflection was still dressed in that old-fashioned suit. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight. I waved my arms, hoping that would break the illusion, but the figures kept dancing as if they couldn't see me. Then, I noticed one couple stop. The man, tall and serious, stared directly in my direction. The woman by his side squeezed his arm, and they both took a step toward the edge of the mirror. My pulse raced, and a knot formed in my stomach. I felt like I was trespassing on something private. I instinctively backed up a few steps. My heart hammered in my chest. I glanced around for an exit, remembering the double doors I came through, but my curiosity still overpowered my fear. I stayed, watching the couple in the mirror. The man extended a hand toward me as if inviting me to join them. His face was expressionless. My chest felt tight and I hesitated. I could still feel that subtle pressure in the air, urging me to do something. Then I took one step forward, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. My body felt unsteady, like I was in two places at once. In my head, I kept thinking I needed to leave. My practical side told me this was impossible, that the light and the dancing people weren't real. But part of me wanted to see if I could step into that reflection, even for a moment. I stopped just short of touching the mirror's surface, my fingertips tingling. That man in the reflection waited patiently, his hand still extended. I could see the faint color of his cufflinks, the shine of his shoes, and the glitter in the woman's dress. I felt a pull in my chest, as if something was tugging at me from the other side. My breathing got heavier. My hand trembled inches away from the glass. Then I heard a scraping sound behind me. I turned around fast, my heart pounding, and saw a chair that had been stacked against the wall sliding a few inches across the floor. Nobody pushed it. It moved on its own. That was enough to jolt me back to my senses. I spun on my heel and headed for the door, not caring about the reflection anymore. My pulse drummed in my ears and my legs felt weak. I managed to find the double doors, push them open, and get out into the hallway. In the hallway, the lights were dead. No mysterious glow. I glanced over my shoulder through the open doors. I could still see the chandeliers lit inside, casting an eerie brightness. I forced myself to keep moving, ignoring the curiosity that told me to look back at the mirrors. The hallway felt quieter than before. No rustling breeze, just my own footsteps and my own breathing. I reached the front entrance and put my hand on the door handle. I heard a distant thud echo from the ballroom, but I refused to turn around. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped my phone when I tried to pull it out of my pocket. I pushed the door open and stepped into the outside air, which felt warmer and fresher than the stale air inside. I closed the door behind me and paused on the front steps, trying to collect myself. My shirt was sticking to my back from sweat. My mouth was dry. I looked around at the deserted street and empty sidewalk. No one else seemed to notice this building or what was happening inside. I felt disconnected, like I was returning from somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I walked around the side of the building to see if there was another entrance. There was, but it was boarded up. The windows were dirty, and I couldn't see through them properly. I pressed my ear against one of them, half expecting to hear that soft waltz. But I only heard silence. I felt a weird combination of relief and disappointment. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back in or run away from the place as fast as I could. After a few minutes, my heart rate slowed down a bit, and my hands stopped trembling so badly. I decided I needed to leave. It was too strange, and I didn't want to push my luck. As I walked away, I kept glancing back at the building's front doors. They looked dark and unwelcoming, like they didn't want me to come back. I felt a sudden chill on my neck again, though there was no wind outside. My hair stood on end. I walked faster. When I finally reached my hotel, I realized I still had the urge to check the pictures on my phone. But when I pulled it out, I noticed I hadn't taken a single photo after I entered the ballroom. I had a few shots of the exterior, but none inside. I kicked myself mentally, realizing I had been so caught up in that weird experience that I forgot to document it. But part of me was also relieved. I didn't want to discover some random silhouette or reflection that I hadn't noticed at the time. I locked my hotel room door and dropped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the hum of the air conditioner and let myself calm down. My clothes were still dusty and I felt drained. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something I couldn't explain. My mind went over the scene again. The chandeliers lighting up, the silent dancers in the mirrors, the old-fashioned reflection of myself. I wondered if I had stepped into some kind of parallel moment or if my imagination had run wild. But I knew what I felt. My body had reacted like it was real. The next morning, I woke up with an ache in my neck and shoulders, probably from the tension. I thought about going back to see the building in daylight, maybe bringing a flashlight or something to test the electricity. but I decided against it. The memory of that final moment, when the chair moved, and I heard that distant thud, was too fresh. I didn't want to risk feeling that strange pull again. It was like the place was alive and wanted me inside. That thought alone made my stomach tighten and my palms sweat. I left town later that day. As I drove away, I kept replaying the details in my head. The silent waltz, the reflections, that man's outstretched hand. I swore I could still feel that cool breeze on my skin, but I told myself I was done with it. Sometimes it's better to walk away when something doesn't make sense. Even now, I still remember how the chandeliers glowed in that silent, abandoned hall, and how the mirrors showed me a version of myself I didn't recognize. That place tried to pull me in, and for a few seconds it succeeded. I'll never forget that tension in my chest, the pounding of my heart, and the way my breath caught in my throat as I stood surrounded by dancing ghosts. I got away, but I still feel like I left a part of myself in that ballroom, lingering among those couples that never seemed to stop. I arrived at the abandoned factory on a cold morning. The sun was out, but the shadows around that place felt thicker than normal. I parked my car near a bent chain-link fence. My plan was simple: get inside, take photos of the old machinery, and capture the texture of rusted metal. I expected dust, silence, and maybe a few rodents. I did not expect to feel like I was trespassing on something active. I certainly did not expect to see a figure moving around in a room that looked spotless behind mirrored glass. Yet, that's exactly what happened. I'm a freelance photographer, and I like to explore old industrial buildings. They have a unique kind of detail, mostly in the architecture. Sometimes I find old signs or leftover equipment that still has a story to tell through its design. On that first day, I walked through the main entrance of the factory. The big metal doors were wide open, hanging on their hinges. I stepped inside, and the stale smell of dirt, decay, and rust hit me immediately. I heard my boots crunch through random debris on the floor. My first thought was that this place had been abandoned for at least a couple of decades. The paint was flaking off the walls in big sheets. The ceiling had holes in it. In some areas, light streamed through cracks, making bright spots on the otherwise dark interior. I set up my camera on a tripod near a row of old conveyor belts. They had a thick layer of dust. A few tangled wires hung from a broken panel. I tried a few shots, adjusting the exposure to capture the strange angles of steel beams overhead. I was so focused on the camera that I almost missed the sound of footsteps somewhere above me. They sounded dull and steady. I paused and looked around, thinking maybe there was a second floor that was still accessible. I saw a metal staircase in the corner, covered in rust. I decided to check it out later, but I made a mental note. I wasn't alone. I spent another hour shooting in the ground floor area. I found a few interesting pieces of equipment, like giant wheels that once carried belts and an old control panel with dials and levers. Everything was covered in a gray layer of dust. I stepped carefully, trying not to slip on the scattered debris. It felt normal for an abandoned site, except for that sense of being watched. Every now and then I glanced around, expecting to see some random worker or security guard. The place looked too far gone for security, so it might have been squatters. Still, it felt strange. I heard a few faint clicks, like someone tapping on metal. Each time I turned, there was nothing. After I gathered enough shots downstairs, I headed to the stairwell. The steps looked sturdy enough, but they creaked under my weight. My heart beat faster with each step. My mind kept replaying the sound of those footsteps from above. When I reached the top, I walked into a hallway. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with dusty windows that faced the interior of the factory. Some were broken. Some were so grimy I could barely see through them. Toward the far end, I noticed a section that had mirrored glass. It stood out because it looked cleaner, as if someone had wiped it. I walked toward that area. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a window. It was an entire room enclosed by mirrored panels. The rest of the second floor was in shambles, with broken tiles and rusted beams. But that glass room looked oddly intact. I stepped up to one of the panels, trying to see inside. The reflection was strong, so I couldn't see much at first. Then under the right angle of light, I saw a figure moving inside. It was a person walking at a relaxed pace, as if checking tables or chairs. My heart jumped. Who else would be in this building, alone, in a well-maintained room? I knocked on the glass. The figure paused, or at least I thought it did. When I moved around to try another angle, the reflection changed. I saw no one. The inside looked like a standard meeting room with a table and chairs, all in good shape. I pulled on the door handle, but it was locked. I circled the hallway, hoping to find another entrance. Around the back, I found a door that led into the same space, but this door was wide open. I stepped inside and almost dropped my camera. The room was completely trashed. The chairs were toppled, the table was broken, and there was dust everywhere. Chunks of plaster littered the floor. No way this was the same pristine room I'd just glimpsed. My mouth went dry. I felt a tingling in my arms, like little pins stabbing my skin. The air smelled musty and stale. I took a step forward, and my foot kicked a piece of broken tile. A loud clack echoed, and for a second I thought I heard a voice somewhere nearby. It sounded like a quiet laugh, but I couldn't be sure. My stomach churned. I decided to leave. That night I couldn't stop thinking about that room. I reviewed my photos, but they were all standard shots of abandoned equipment. I had no proof of what I'd seen. My curiosity got the better of me, so I returned the next day. It was around the same time, late morning. I walked the same path, through the main doors, past the dusty equipment and up the staircase. This time, I heard more than just footsteps. I heard a faint hum of voices as I reached the second floor. It was as if there were people having a conversation in another room. When I turned the corner, the hallway was empty. The glass panels were still there, reflecting the corridor's broken lights. I approached again, trying to see inside. This time I saw a room that looked neat again. The chairs and tables were arranged in a clean formation. I could even see a few papers on the table, like someone had left them there moments ago. I saw a shape pass by the glass like a shadow. My throat felt tight. I stepped back and tried the door, locked again. The handle didn't budge. I hurried around to the other door, the one that was open the day before. When I got there, it was off its hinges, hanging crookedly, and the room was in ruins. I looked through the shattered opening and saw nothing that matched the intact space I'd just seen. The floor was covered in crumbled debris. Spiderwebs clung to the corners. It felt like a dirty tomb. I tried to take a photo, but my camera's shutter clicked and jammed. That had never happened before. I fiddled with the settings, but something felt off. My hands were shaking. My neck felt hot. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I heard a noise above me. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy across the ceiling. I stared up at the cracked plaster, half expecting it to cave in. It didn't, so I slowly backed out into the hallway. My plan was to get out, but then I heard faint laughter behind me, like a short burst of amusement. My hair stood on end. I rushed down the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't know who or what was up there, but I knew I wanted to see that room again. A part of me thought I might find some kind of hidden operation, like a group using the factory for illegal activities, but I never saw any sign of that. I saw no fresh footprints, no food wrappers, nothing that suggested real human use. The only time I sensed activity was near that mirrored room, and each time my camera seemed to act up. My body felt tense in ways I couldn't explain. Over the next few weeks, I visited the factory several times. I tried going early in the morning, in the afternoon, and at night. I always approached quietly, stepping around piles of debris to avoid making noise. Yet I still heard muffled voices whenever I got near the second floor. Sometimes I heard a single voice, maybe muttering or whispering. Other times I heard several voices, accompanied by footsteps that echoed in the hallway. Each time I went, that corridor felt colder. My breath condensed in the air even when the rest of the building felt normal. I brought a small thermometer once and saw the temperature drop by several degrees as I walked toward that mirrored room. On one occasion, I set up a video camera on a tripod in the hallway, aimed at the glass panels. I moved back around the corner, hoping to capture anything that walked by. I sat there for an hour, listening. I heard faint sounds, but nothing clear. When I reviewed the footage, I saw weird static lines right as the hallway got quiet. It was like something had messed with the recording. I couldn't see any figure. After that, I tried to photograph the interior of the room from different angles, but whenever I raised my camera, my chest got tight and my hands tingled. It felt like an electric current running up my arms. It wasn't painful, but it was unpleasant. It made me sweat. My mind screamed at me to stop. A few times, I couldn't even press the shutter button. It was like my body refused. Still, I refused to give up. I wanted to prove I wasn't imagining it. One afternoon, I found an old maintenance passage that led beneath the floors. I crawled through a cramped tunnel full of dust and cobwebs, hoping to come up directly under that special room. The tunnel smelled like mold. My hands got dirty, and I cut my forearm on a protruding nail. I cursed under my breath and kept going. I reached a small metal ladder that went up into what looked like a maintenance closet. I climbed up, heart pounding. I could hear faint echoes of footsteps in the distance. When I pushed open the hatch, I emerged in a dark room with shelves of cleaning supplies. There was a broken mop handle, a few old buckets, and a stack of crates. Everything was covered in dust. On the other side of that closet, I saw a door that, in theory, should have led to the mirrored room. I tried the knob. It was locked from the inside. I pressed my ear against the door. I heard movement, like someone brushing against a table. Then, everything went silent. My heart pounded so loud I could hear my own pulse. I wanted to knock, but I was too nervous. Instead, I waited, hoping something would happen. After a few minutes, I heard a faint click, like a door latch. Then I heard footsteps fading away. I took a deep breath and knocked anyway. No answer. I turned the knob again and gave a solid push. It wouldn't budge. I returned through the maintenance hatch, frustrated. My arm stung from the cut, and my throat felt parched. I left the building and sat in my car for a while, trying to calm down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My head throbbed. It felt like the place was trying to block me at every turn. But I also felt driven. I needed to see what was in that room when it looked clean and intact. I needed proof that the person inside was real. On my last visit, I decided to bring a friend who shared my curiosity. He wasn't a photographer, but he believed my story. We arrived in the late afternoon. As soon as we entered, we heard soft chatter. It sounded like it was right above us. We moved quickly upstairs. My friend stood at one end of the corridor while I stood at the other, so we could see both sides of the mirrored room. We agreed we would signal each other if we saw anything. For a moment, everything felt still, like the building was holding its breath. Then my friend called out quietly, "I just saw something move by the glass." I hurried over to him. He pointed to the center panel. I peered in, and my blood ran cold. The room looked spotless again. I saw chairs in perfect condition, and I noticed a figure near the back, apparently facing the wall. I couldn't see a face, just a vague outline. I pressed my camera to the glass, but the lens wouldn't focus. I tried manual focus, but the view was blurred. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. My friend pulled out his phone to record. The figure moved, like it was walking to a table. We exchanged a quick look of astonishment. We sprinted to the alternate entrance, hoping to catch whoever was inside. But when we got there, the doorway was open, the room was rotted, and there was no one around. My friend's phone had recorded only static. My camera's memory card showed corrupted files. We stood there, breathing heavily, scanning the corners. Dust floated in the air. The only sound was our own breathing. Then we heard a muffled laugh, almost playful, from the hallway behind us. We both jumped and swung around. No one was there. I felt a sharp twinge in my stomach, like I'd been punched without actual force. My friend looked pale. Neither of us wanted to stay. Now I haven't returned in a while. I still have the photos of the factory's first floor, which look ordinary. But I have nothing to show for that room except my own memories. There was no threat of violence, no sign of real danger, yet I could sense an unspoken rule. That space doesn't want an audience. Whenever I tried to capture it, something interfered, like The building itself was alive and rejecting outsiders. My skin tingled every time I raised my camera. The more I persisted, the heavier the atmosphere became. I never saw any direct aggression, but I never felt welcome. It's like the place had its own ongoing life, beyond normal logic. I still think about going back even though I know it's probably a lost cause. My heart pounds when I remember that reflection of a clean, functioning room. I wonder if, in some alternate version of events, people are still working there, stepping around the same tables, ignoring the dust and decay. I wonder if they watch me through the mirrored glass, seeing me as the trespasser who doesn't belong. No matter how many times I visited, I never managed to catch a single clear shot of that version of the room. All I have are shaky memories, strange static on my recordings, and a lingering sensation of being pushed away. Maybe that's enough to keep me out. Or maybe it's just enough to pull me in again someday. For now, I'm leaving it alone. Because every time I think of returning, I feel the pins and needles sensation crawling up my arms, like a warning telling me that some things are better left unseen. I'm not the type of person who believes in haunted places. I've lived in this city my whole life, and I never thought an empty intersection surrounded by half-lit buildings could get under my skin. But for the last few weeks, I can't walk past that crossroads without feeling my chest tighten. Sometimes I hear the faint trace of my name. Other times I just feel a chill. It started on a night I'll never forget. I went there on purpose, hoping to prove to myself that it was all just superstition. I was wrong. Nothing happened to me physically, but something changed inside my head. I can't shake it off. I first heard about that intersection from a friend at work. He told me how people avoid it at night, not because of crime, but because of the weird vibe. He said everyone who crosses it after midnight feels like they're being watched. I shrugged it off. I even made jokes about it. An intersection can't hurt anybody, it's just a bunch of roads, I said. But the stories kept creeping into my mind. One day I decided to do something about it. I told myself I was going to check it out in the middle of the night. I picked a Saturday because I didn't have to wake up early for anything on Sunday. I spent the evening watching TV, trying not to psych myself out. Around 1:30 in the morning, I felt this jolt, like a small burst of energy that told me it was time to go. I put on my jacket, grabbed my phone, and headed outside. The street was quiet, just a few cars passing, and the occasional hum of air conditioners perched in windows. I walked the few blocks to that intersection, half expecting to feel nothing unusual at all. By the time I reached the corner, it was close to 2 a.m. The buildings around there are tall, about 15 floors each, with narrow windows that give off a soft glow from the occasional night owl's lamp. The streetlights stand in a row, casting an orange light that flickers sometimes. I glanced around, noticing there wasn't a single person in sight. I didn't even see a random cat or a homeless person. It was just me, and the breeze, and the hum of distant traffic. I took my first steps onto the intersection. Nothing happened at first. It was silent aside from the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement. Then, I got to the center, where the 4 roads meet. The wind picked up a bit. The streetlights started flickering more intensely, like someone was playing with a light switch. I felt my heart rate increase. I told myself it was just bad wiring or a power surge. But then the flickering got synchronized somehow, like they were pulsing in unison. It wasn't random, it was a rapid on-off, and then they all dimmed at the same time. That's when I heard something that felt impossible to explain. It was a collection of voices, whispering. It wasn't any one pitch or timbre. It sounded like a group of people all standing close, but I couldn't see them. They were murmuring words, half-formed sentences that made no sense. Then my full name, said 3 or 4 times in different tones. I froze. My arms and legs felt stiff. My scalp prickled. I could literally feel the blood drain from my face. It was like every part of me wanted to run, but I also needed to know if it was real. I pulled out my phone to record what I was hearing. My hands were shaking, so it took me a second to open the camera app. I switched to video and pressed record, In the moment, I could still hear the voices. They were speaking in these broken phrases like, "Come closer, don't run," and then my full name again. I kept the camera pointed at the darkness, half expecting to catch a glimpse of someone. But the screen didn't show anything but the empty intersection. It just showed the streetlights flickering. Then the lights blinked and everything went dark. I'm talking pitch black. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face for a few seconds. My ears started ringing, but beneath that ringing, the whispers continued. They felt louder, more urgent, like a dozen pairs of lips were right next to my ears. I tried to keep filming, but my phone screen flickered, and the battery icon suddenly dropped to 0. The phone shut off, even though I had at least 60% battery when I left my apartment. I tapped the power button, but it refused to turn back on. For a split second, I panicked. My breath came out in short, quick bursts. My skin felt cold. I could feel sweat on my forehead, and the breeze made it feel like my skin was tightening. The darkness around me was overwhelming. Then the streetlights came back on, dimmer than before, and the voices faded. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was like turning off a radio. One moment they were there, and then they were just gone. I looked around, eyes darting from one corner of the intersection to the other. There was no one, not a single person. My phone wouldn't turn on. I didn't hear any footsteps or doors. The windows of the buildings were all closed. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely focus. I managed to take a shaky step backward, almost stumbling on the edge of a curb. Then I just started walking. I wasn't running, but I was moving fast. As I walked, I kept glancing behind me. My jacket felt too warm, and I tried to breathe slowly to calm down. By the time I made it back to my apartment, my phone turned on again, but it showed the battery was at 45%. I checked the video. It was there, but it was just static. No image, no sound, just gray and white noise. That alone sent a chill down my spine. I tried replaying it a few times, thinking maybe the file was corrupted. But it never changed. It was pure static. I spent the rest of the night lying on my couch, staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers again. I felt my name crawling around the back of my mind. Even though I knew I was safe in my own home, I couldn't shake this sense of being watched. My body felt tense. My shoulders ached. I tried to distract myself, but I couldn't stop replaying what happened. The next morning, I told myself I was just tired. Maybe it was some bizarre coincidence with the lights. Maybe some weird group of people messing with me. But as the days went on, I noticed something was off. Whenever I passed by that intersection during the day, because ironically, it's part of my usual route to the grocery store or to work, I felt a small wave of anxiety. It was subtle at first. My heartbeat would speed up a bit, and I'd breathe a little faster. Then, on the third day after that night, I heard a faint whisper again, right as I stepped off the curb. It was my name, drifting through the air like someone standing right next to me. But no one was there. I tried to act casual, like it didn't bother me. I had to walk by there. It's the shortest path to my office, and I didn't want to take a 10-minute detour just to avoid a corner of the street. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling got. One afternoon as I crossed, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My skin broke out in goosebumps. My eyes started watering from the cold, even though it was actually warm outside. I heard a soft static sound in my ears, like old TV static, and I realized it sounded exactly like the video from my phone. My coworkers noticed I was tense. Some asked if I was okay. I made up excuses about not sleeping well, or stress. I didn't want to tell them the truth. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. But every day I still had to walk by that intersection. Each time there was a small sign of something. A flicker in the streetlights, a whisper, a sudden chill. Sometimes it was so subtle, I almost thought I was imagining it. But I felt it. I couldn't block it out. One afternoon, I decided to record again, but during daylight. I pulled out my phone as I approached the crosswalk. I hit record on video and aimed it at the intersection. Nothing strange was happening at that moment except for a mild flicker in one of the streetlights. Later, I played it back. The flicker was there, but I also heard a faint static noise in the audio. It was like a radio not tuned in properly. I slowed the playback, trying to see if there were voices hidden in the static. I couldn't make out words, but it had the same eerie tone as what I heard that night. I started avoiding that route altogether. I woke up earlier just to take a different street to work. It added a solid 10 minutes to my commute, but I felt like I had no choice. For about a week, I didn't cross that intersection at all. The tension in my shoulders eased up. I slept better. I didn't hear the whispers in my dreams. I thought maybe whatever happened would fade if I ignored it. But then one evening, I was out with some coworkers for a late dinner, and I lost track of time. By the time I left the restaurant, it was almost 1 a.m. We'd been chatting, so I was in a decent mood. I figured I'd just take the normal route home. It was late, but I didn't want to walk the long way. That intersection was on my path. I told myself, it's just an empty crossroads, there's nothing there. I tried to push aside my memories. When I got close, I felt that sensation again, like my stomach was tightening and my hairs were standing on end. I forced myself to keep going. The sidewalks were empty. The traffic light at the intersection was blinking yellow. It was quiet except for a distant rumble of an engine somewhere down the street. I stepped off the curb and walked to the center. I smelled something like damp concrete and stale air. It reminded me of a basement. The streetlights flickered again, but this time they didn't go out completely. They just dimmed. I heard a static crackle in my ears. I could hear my breath, loud and uneven. My heart was pounding, but I kept moving. Then the whispers started again. They came from all around, but I couldn't see a single person. The voices were saying my name. They also said random bits of words like wait, stay, listen, but never in full sentences. I gritted my teeth. My fingers were shaking. My back felt cold. I pulled my jacket tighter. I walked as fast as I could without breaking into a run. The whispers didn't stop until I cleared the intersection. Then everything went still. The flickering lights returned to normal. The humming of distant traffic felt almost comforting. I hurried home, my jaw clenched the whole way. When I got inside, I locked the door and stared at it, half expecting the voices to follow me in. But it stayed quiet. Ever since then, I've accepted that I can't explain what's happening at that intersection. It doesn't make sense. There's no obvious reason for the flickering lights or the whispers. No one's ever reported any crime there. But something is off about that place after dark. Like there's an energy that grows when the streets are empty. I haven't gone back at that time. I don't plan to. Yet I still have to pass there now and then during the day. And it's always the same feeling. A chill, a hint of static, sometimes a faint whisper of my name. I've told a couple of close friends what happened. They look at me like they're not sure if I'm messing with them or telling the truth. One buddy said I should report it to the city so they can check the electrical system. Another friend told me to see a therapist, just in case. I haven't done either. Part of me wants to pretend none of this happened, but every time I walk by that damn intersection, I'm reminded that it wasn't just a dream. Last week, I walked over there in the late afternoon, just as a test. The sky was still bright and people were around. Cars were driving by. The flickering lights looked normal. The buildings looked less menacing in daylight. I stopped in the middle of the crosswalk for a few seconds, just looking around. Nothing weird happened. I only felt the usual hint of anxiety. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I heard the static again just for a second. I felt it buzz in my ears. Then it was gone. I looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. I don't know what causes this. I don't think I'll ever find a logical explanation. The intersection itself hasn't changed, but I have. I'm jumpier now. I double-check my phone battery before I go out. Sometimes I record random bits of my walk, hoping I don't pick up anything. But deep down, I know if I cross that place at the wrong time, I'll hear the voices again. I don't feel like I'm in danger. Nothing hurt me physically. I haven't found any scratches or bruises. It's not like someone attacked me or tried to rob me. It's just this eerie presence that refuses to let go. It sits in the back of my mind, reminding me that late at night, certain corners of this city have secrets we can't explain. I've decided I'll keep my distance. I'm not afraid of a lot, but I'm not dumb enough to tempt fate either. Even writing this down, or telling anyone about it, makes me uneasy. I can feel my pulse racing just thinking about the memory of those flickering lights and the whispers calling my name. I don't want to go back there in the dark. I don't want to experience that static again, or have my phone die right in the middle of recording. I just want to go about my life without looking over my shoulder. Yet, every so often, I catch myself glancing at the street corner from a distance. There's a small part of me that wonders if any of it was real. Then I remember how my heart pounded, how my phone recorded nothing but static, how I could hear those voices so clearly. That was real enough for me. I don't need any more proof. So that's the story. If someone asks why I don't cross that intersection after midnight, I'll say it's just a habit. Or I'll say I like the exercise of walking a little farther. I don't owe anyone an explanation. I'm just doing what I have to do to stay sane. Because even if no one got hurt there, and even if no official report says anything weird ever happened, I know what I experienced. And I'm not taking any chances. Whenever I get close to that place, I can still feel it. My name, whispered from nowhere. My skin tingling, the weight in the air. I don't need to hear that chorus again. I'd rather play it safe and keep my distance. I never thought an old bronze mirror could make me question my own senses. When I first saw it at the auction, I felt an odd pull toward it, like I needed to have it. I don't believe in hauntings or curses, but something about that dull surface caught my eye. It was small, about the size of a large book. The frame had dark green and brown patches of corrosion around the edges. The glass itself wasn't smooth. It looked a bit wavy, like cheap glass in an old window. I paid more than I wanted to, but I didn't care at the time. I brought it home and set it on a small table in the corner of my living room. That was the start. On the first day, I barely noticed anything strange. I caught my reflection in the morning when I walked by, but the image was darker than I expected. The room's light didn't bounce off the surface the way normal mirrors do. My reflection looked washed out, like someone had smeared grease on the mirror. I remember touching the frame and feeling a bit of rust flake off. I wiped my fingers on my pants. I felt a mild curiosity, not fear. That changed on the second day. I got up early, around 6, to make coffee. I passed the mirror without a thought. But when I glanced at it, I saw a white face staring back at me. It was my face at first, but the features shifted. I noticed the skin losing color and the eyes sinking in. My stomach clenched. I stepped closer. The reflection changed again, returning to normal. I stood there, heart thumping. I lifted my hand in front of the mirror. My mirror image lifted its hand too, but the movement was slightly out of sync. It looked like a slow reaction, maybe half a second behind. I let out a short laugh to calm myself. I blamed the distortion on the wavy glass or on my sleepy state. I walked away and tried to forget it. Later that morning, I walked past the mirror again. This time I paused and looked straight at it, trying to see if there was a warping effect. My reflection seemed normal, except for the overall gloom on the surface. I raised my left hand. The reflection raised its left hand. No delay. I stared for a few more seconds. Nothing odd happened, so I moved on. It was only that afternoon when I headed out for groceries that I saw it again. The reflection flickered, showing me that pale version of my face with hollow cheeks and dark circles under the eyes. It lasted less than a second. My chest felt tight. I found myself touching my face to see if it was cold or clammy, but I felt normal. I left the house in a hurry. That night, I decided to place the mirror face down on the table. I didn't want to catch a glimpse of it by accident. I had dinner in silence. I switched on the TV, but I couldn't concentrate on the news or the sitcoms. My mind kept drifting to that strange reflection. Around 10, I walked to the mirror again. I lifted it and held it at eye level. My face stared back at me. I looked tired, but it was definitely me. No strange changes. I tapped the mirror. It felt solid. I wiped the glass with a clean cloth, removing some dust and rust residue. Then I saw something move behind the glass. It was faint, like a shift in shadows. My throat went dry. I leaned in, trying to see if it was a trick of the lamp across the room. Nothing else happened. My reflection stayed still. My heart was pounding. I placed the mirror face down again and went to my bedroom. I had trouble sleeping. My mind kept racing through the day's events. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but I couldn't focus. Around 2 a.m, I got up and went to the living room. I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. The mirror was still where I left it, face down on the table. I stood there looking at it. My body felt tense, and I noticed a slight tremor in my hands. I decided to leave it alone. I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. The next day, I forced myself to follow my normal routine. I went for a short walk. I stopped by a diner to grab a sandwich. I tried not to think about the mirror. I got back in the afternoon. My apartment felt stuffy, so I opened a window. I glanced over at the table. The mirror was upright. I knew I had left it face down. My stomach lurched. I walked closer. I checked the table. There were tiny scratches on the wooden surface, as if the mirror had slid or been moved. I was alone in my apartment. I hadn't had any visitors. My hands felt sweaty. I picked up the mirror. There was a new crack on the back of the bronze frame. I have no idea how it happened. I placed the mirror back on the table and stepped away. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore it. I watched TV with the volume up. I made dinner. I tried calling a friend, but my voice sounded shaky, and I didn't want to explain why. When it got dark, I felt a pull to go over to the mirror again. I flicked on every light in the living room. I approached the mirror. My heart thumped. I lifted it. My face stared back at me, but it wasn't moving right. There was a half-second lag. When I blinked, the reflection blinked a moment later. My gut tightened. My mouth went dry. Then the reflection's expression changed. The eyes became hollow again. The skin turned pale. My breath caught. It looked like a different person entirely, but I recognized parts of my own features. The face in the mirror opened its mouth as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. I felt a shiver crawl up my arms. The face looked desperate. Its eyes darted to the side, then back at me. I lowered the mirror, but my reflection stayed in place for another second before following. I felt lightheaded. I decided to put the mirror in the closet. I didn't want it out in the open. I placed it on a shelf and shut the door. I breathed out, trying to steady my nerves. My heart was racing. I grabbed a bottle of water from the kitchen and drank it. My stomach churned. I put on some music to distract myself, but I couldn't shake the image of that face. At around midnight, I heard a faint scraping sound coming from the closet. My skin prickled. I stood up from the couch and listened. The sound repeated, like metal scraping against wood. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I walked to the closet. My legs felt weak. I opened the door. The mirror was upright again, leaning against the back wall. I stepped closer. My flashlight illuminated the bronze frame. There were new streaks of rust. The scraping sound stopped. I realized it was the mirror shifting on the shelf, as if something was trying to move it from the other side. My head felt like it was buzzing. I reached out and touched the surface. It was cold, much colder than it should have been. Then I felt a tug, like a slight pull on my fingertips. My chest went tight. I yanked my hand away. My fingers tingled for several seconds afterward. I slammed the closet door and wedged a chair under the knob. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept watching the closet, half expecting the door to swing open. Every time the apartment creaked, I jumped. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but I felt shaky. My eyes burned from staying awake. Around 5 a.m, I finally dozed off on the couch. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the living room window. I felt a bit calmer in the daylight. I decided to inspect the mirror again. I removed the chair and slowly opened the closet door. The mirror was lying flat, not upright. I slid it off the shelf and carried it to the kitchen table. I examined every inch of it. The rust patches seemed larger. The glass was still wavy. My reflection looked normal in the bright morning sun. I raised my hand, waved, and touched the glass. No delay. I felt slightly relieved. I made coffee, sat down, and tried to think clearly. I told myself I would return the mirror to an antique store, or maybe throw it away. I even considered smashing it, but I worried about shards of old glass. I hated the idea of dealing with broken pieces, and some part of me still felt attached to the mirror. It's strange, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. I walked to my phone and opened a search engine to look for local antique dealers who might buy it. That's when I heard a soft thump in the kitchen. I rushed back in. The mirror had fallen off the table onto the floor, face up. I didn't see any new damage. The face in the mirror was not my own. It was that pale figure again, staring at me. The eyes looked even deeper set than before. The lips twitched, like it was trying to speak. My scalp tingled. My immediate thought was to cover the mirror. I grabbed a dish towel and tossed it over the glass. But as soon as it landed, I heard a faint scraping noise. I picked the mirror up, towel and all, and carried it to the living room. I placed it on my couch and paced around, trying to calm down. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I remember noticing a drop of sweat sliding down the side of my face. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. After a few minutes, I mustered the nerve to pull the towel off. The reflection was normal. It was just me, looking freaked out. I inhaled slowly and decided to check the delay. I lifted my right arm. The reflection followed instantly. I exhaled. My muscles felt tight. Then, out of nowhere, the reflection lagged again. My arm went down, but the reflection's arm stayed up for another second. I froze. My head buzzed. The reflection's face shifted back to that pale, miserable face. I watched in shock as it placed a hand against the glass on its side, as if it wanted to push through. My own hand wasn't lifted. I felt a jolt like static electricity pass through my arm. My fingers tingled. The face in the mirror looked desperate, like it was pleading. I stepped back. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't know who. I felt embarrassed. How do I explain a mirror that shows a strange man's face? I tried filming it on my phone, but whenever I pressed record, the mirror showed my normal reflection. The glitch never happened on camera. That made me doubt my own eyes. But I couldn't deny the physical sensations like the cold surface and the tug on my fingers. Over the next few days, I wrapped the mirror in a blanket and stored it in a locked cabinet in my bedroom. I kept hearing faint tapping sounds at night. Sometimes I woke up covered in sweat. I'd hear that scraping noise again, as if the mirror wanted me to open the cabinet. I resisted at first, but on the third night, I snapped the lock open just to see if it was still there. The mirror was upright inside the cabinet. I hadn't left it that way. My heart raced. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I touched the glass, ice cold. I felt that soft pull again, trying to drag my fingers in. My arms shook. I pulled away. I sat on my bed staring at the cabinet. My breathing was shallow. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I hated how powerless I felt. I closed the cabinet and locked it again. I considered throwing the mirror out. I even took it to my front door. But something made me stop. I worried about leaving it outside. I imagined someone else picking it up and experiencing the same thing. I decided to keep it until I could figure out a better plan. Last night I decided enough was enough. I set the mirror on the floor in my bedroom and sat in front of it with all the lights on. I wanted to face it head on. My reflection stared back at me. My hair looked messy. My eyes were red from lack of sleep. I took a deep breath. Then, without warning, the mirror went dark. It wasn't the room, the lights were still on. The glass itself dimmed. The reflection disappeared. I leaned forward, my pulse hammering. I saw movement in the darkness of the mirror. It was a shape, pale and flickering. It pressed itself against the inside of the glass. Then the reflection returned. showing that same face with sunken eyes. It lifted its hand in a slow wave, behind by a fraction of a second. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I swallowed hard. Suddenly, the figure's mouth opened and I saw its lips form a silent word. I couldn't hear anything, but it looked like it said, "Help." My spine tingled. My immediate thought was to reach out, but I hesitated. I felt sweat dripping down my neck. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then the figure placed its palms flat on the glass, as though trying to break through. My hand hovered above the surface. I felt a stabbing fear. I didn't know what would happen if I touched it, but I felt an odd urge to try. My hand shook. I pressed my palm against the glass. A cold jolt traveled up my arm. I gasped. For a moment I felt a pulling force, like something was about to drag me in. Then I yanked my hand away and scrambled back. The reflection lagged again. It tried to pull its hand away, but stayed stuck for a second longer. Its eyes looked wild with fear. When it finally broke free, the glass returned to normal. I saw my own shocked face. I sat there, breathing fast. My skin felt clammy. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I don't know what the mirror wants. I don't know if that face is part of me or something else. It shows up at random times. Sometimes I see my normal reflection. Sometimes I see that pale face. Sometimes I feel a tug on my fingers. I haven't smashed it yet, though I've thought about it. I keep thinking it might cause something worse to happen. Instead, I keep the mirror wrapped up in a thick blanket, locked away in my closet. I still hear the scraping noises. I still wake up in a sweat, fearing I'll see that face again. I'm telling this story because I feel like I'm losing my grip on what's real. The tension in my chest never fully goes away. Even now, I can sense the mirror in the closet. Sometimes I hear faint tapping, like it's knocking from the inside. I can't explain it. I only know that every time I look at that tarnished bronze surface, I see something that's not supposed to be there. And each time my reflection lags a bit, as if trying to warn me about something I'm too scared to face. I haven't told anyone about this, and I'm not sure what I'll do next. But every night I worry that I'll wake up to find that mirror in the middle of my room, with that man's face staring back at me, struggling to get out. It's the most unsettling feeling I've ever known, and I have no idea how to make it stop. For now, I just leave it in the closet and hope it stays quiet. But that hope gets smaller every time I hear that faint sound on the other side of the door. I still remember the first time I stepped into that corridor, feeling a sudden chill that made my skin tighten. It was like walking into a large freezer, except there were no vents or open windows anywhere. I work in a pretty standard building, nothing fancy, but there's this one hallway on the west side that everyone avoids. People shrug it off or joke about it, but I noticed they never actually go there unless they have to. I got curious, maybe a bit obsessed. I started checking it out during my breaks, trying to figure out where the cold was coming from. I heard rumors about an ex-employee who lost his mind, but nobody ever mentioned anything about actual deaths. They just said he left in a hurry and never came back. The strange part is that every time I go there, my phone acts weird. If I try to take pictures or record, it either glitches or the battery drops to 0. Then there's this whistle, like a faint tune drifting from somewhere near the ceiling. It vanishes as soon as I focus on it. At first I thought I was imagining things, but then I noticed how tense I felt afterward, like I was dragging something invisible behind me. I always come home feeling uneasy, like I'm not alone, and the air around me turns heavy and cold. I work as a junior analyst in an office located on the 3rd floor. The building is kind of old, with flickering lights in some hallways and scuffed paint on the walls. Most of my colleagues keep to themselves. They're friendly enough, but everyone likes to stay in the well-lit sections. The corridor in question is on the far side near the storage room. People only go there when they need extra paper or supplies. There's a small break room next to it, but nobody ever uses it. The reason is pretty clear. The lights are dimmer and there's a weird draft that nobody can explain. It's not freezing cold like winter air, but it's enough to make me shiver and rub my arms even on hot days. The first time I really paid attention to the corridor was about 3 months ago. I was heading to the storage room for more printer paper. As soon as I turned the corner, I noticed this sharp drop in temperature. The tiny hairs on my arms stood up, and I felt my chest tighten. I checked for a vent or a door, but the corridor had nothing. It's just a straight passage with fluorescent lights that flicker sometimes. At the time, I thought maybe the AC was faulty, so I grabbed the paper and hurried back, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I went home feeling jumpy. I kept looking over my shoulder, sensing someone behind me. When I turned around, nobody was there. I decided to do a little sleuthing. I asked a coworker named Carla if she ever noticed the cold spot. She looked at me like I'd just mentioned a taboo subject. She said, "Yeah, I've felt it, but I don't like going there." I asked why, and she just said, "People say something happened to one of the employees, that he snapped and had to be taken away. After that, the corridor always felt strange." I wanted more details, but she didn't want to talk. I tried asking a few others, and they gave me the same story. Some told me the ex-employee's name was Marcus. Others said it was Mark. Nobody seemed certain, and no one ever mentioned anyone dying. They just said he was never the same. Because the corridor always had that cold air, I began visiting it during my lunch breaks, hoping to find an explanation. I tried to be logical. Maybe there's a hidden vent or some insulation issue. Maybe there's a draft coming from the ceiling. But no matter how closely I looked, I never found anything. The walls are solid, the ceiling is low, and the floor is old linoleum. I brought a small digital thermometer once just to see if I could measure any difference. But the damn thing wouldn't turn on when I entered the hallway. It worked fine at my desk, but in that corridor it wouldn't register anything. That's when I got a real sense that something wasn't right. I started telling myself that maybe the device was malfunctioning. But it kept happening with other devices too. My phone's camera app would freeze if I tried to record. If I tried to take a picture, the camera shutter would lock, and the app would close by itself. Sometimes the battery would drop from 80% to 5% in a matter of seconds. As soon as I stepped out of that corridor, it went back up to normal, or the phone would start working again. That's when I began to feel an undercurrent of dread. It was like the corridor was rejecting any attempt to capture it on film. One evening, I stayed late. I had some reports to finish, and by the time I clocked out, almost everyone was gone. The cleaning staff was still around, but they were on the other side of the floor. I felt a strange pull toward that corridor. I decided to see if anything changed at night. The hallway lights were still on, but much dimmer than usual. The flickering was worse, and there was a steady hum in the background. I stepped onto the linoleum and felt that familiar chill grip me. It felt like needles running up my arms. My breath came out in a visible puff, even though the rest of the office wasn't that cold. The corridor was quiet, but after a moment, I heard a soft whistle. It wasn't loud or cheerful. It sounded like someone exhaling a tune through their teeth. The sound seemed to come from the corner where the storage room door stood. I walked toward it slowly, my heart pounding. My palms were sweating, and I wiped them on my pants. I stopped and listened again. The whistle stopped. The only noise was the hum of the lights overhead. When I tried to record audio on my phone, it froze. The screen went black, then came back on, showing only static. My legs tensed, and I felt like I should leave, but I stayed. I kept thinking maybe I could catch something if I waited longer. I stood there for a good few minutes, watching the corridor's lights flicker. The hum got louder. Then the whistle returned, but now it seemed to come from above me. I tilted my head up, squinting at the ceiling. I couldn't see anything unusual, just aging panels. But the sound was definitely there. I tried recording again, but my phone was unresponsive. A chill crawled down my spine, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I got this overpowering urge to back away. My heart was racing, and I found myself stepping backward toward the main hallway. Once I was a few feet away, my phone sprang back to life. The temperature around me felt normal again. I went home that night feeling off balance. The sense of being watched clung to me, even on the subway. I felt the cold in my chest, like I couldn't warm up no matter how many layers I wore. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and checked my phone. The battery was at 70%, perfectly normal. I tried playing the audio I had supposedly recorded, but the file was corrupted. It played a burst of static and then silence. My mind raced. I kept thinking about that whistle. It wasn't a normal whistle, more like someone struggling to form a tune. The following week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided to push further. I started going to that corridor twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. The same thing happened every time. As soon as I stepped in, I felt the chill. My devices malfunctioned. The air felt heavy, making it slightly harder to breathe. After a few days, I began to notice something else. There was a musty smell, like stale air that hadn't circulated in a while. It reminded me of old boxes or an unused closet. But the corridor is cleaned regularly, so it didn't make sense for it to smell like that. I also felt like I was never alone in that hallway. It felt like someone was standing right behind me, watching me. Whenever I turned around, no one was there, just the flickering lights and the smooth linoleum floor. One time, I thought I saw a slight movement in my peripheral vision, near the ceiling. But when I looked, there was nothing. It's hard to describe how unsettling it is to see something flicker out of the corner of your eye. My stomach would clench, and I'd feel my heart pound in my ears. One night, I decided to stay even later than usual. I told myself I needed to gather real evidence. I brought a small handheld camcorder from home, thinking it might work better than my phone. After finishing my work around 9 p.m., I headed to the corridor. The building was almost empty, with only a few security guards patrolling. The lights in the corridor were still flickering and the hum was present, but it felt deeper. I switched on the camcorder before walking in. The screen flickered, but it stayed on. I walked slowly, trying to keep the camera steady. I felt the air drop in temperature again, making me tremble. I whispered into the camera, describing what I felt, but I kept my voice low because I had no idea if anyone else was around. The whistle started up almost immediately, echoing off the walls. It sounded closer than before. I aimed the camera at the ceiling, hoping to catch something. A sharp crack came from the device and the screen cut to black. I pressed buttons, but it wouldn't respond. The whistle continued, getting louder. My scalp prickled and my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. It was hard to keep my legs from shaking. I took a step back, holding the useless camcorder in front of me like a shield. Then the whistle stopped. I stood there, breathing hard. I could hear my pulse in my ears. My mouth felt dry and I swallowed hard. I tried to turn around calmly, but I practically stumbled over my own feet. The corridor felt narrower, like the walls were closing in. I walked quickly back to the main area and headed for the elevator. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. I tried not to look behind me. I just wanted to get out. I wasn't thinking about capturing evidence anymore. I just wanted to leave. The elevator felt painfully slow, and I jabbed the button repeatedly. When the doors finally closed, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Once outside, the cool night air felt refreshing. I breathed in deeply, trying to shake off the creeping sensation of being followed. The streets were mostly empty, and I made my way to the subway station. During the ride home, I kept checking the reflection in the window, expecting to see something behind me. My body felt drained, like I'd run a marathon. When I got home, I found that the camcorder battery was drained to 0. It had been fully charged when I left my apartment. Over the next few days, my apartment felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat, but it read the right temperature. I kept feeling that weird chill, though. In the shower, sometimes I'd feel a sudden draft, even though the bathroom door was closed. At night, I heard faint noises like a light whistle far away. I'd get up and check each room, but I never saw anyone. My sleep got worse, and I started waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. My heart would be racing and my body would feel stiff. I'd think about the corridor every time I closed my eyes. Even at work, away from that hallway, I couldn't relax. My coworkers noticed I was jumpy. A friend of mine, Robert, asked if I was all right. I just said I was stressed. I didn't want to drag him into this. I noticed that Carla and some others gave me sympathetic looks, like they knew exactly what I was experiencing but were too scared to mention it. Every time I passed by that part of the office, even if I didn't go in, I felt a slight pressure in my chest. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Finally, 1 week ago, I decided to stop. I made a vow to myself not to go near that corridor anymore. I told myself that I didn't need to solve this mystery. There was nothing for me to gain by poking around, but the pull was strong. Part of me still wanted answers, but I resisted. Instead, I tried to focus on my work and keep my head down. For a few days, things were okay. I slept a bit better, though not completely restful. My phone stopped malfunctioning, and the strange drafts in my apartment died down. But last night, something changed. I was wrapping up a report after everyone had left. I heard a faint whistle, but this time it came from the main area near my cubicle. That made my stomach drop. I turned off my computer, grabbed my bag, and headed straight for the exit. On the way home, I felt cold again. It was a clammy, uncomfortable cold that made me rub my arms constantly. When I got off the subway, my legs felt weak. I swear I heard soft footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. Now I'm in my apartment, writing this down. My thermostat shows a normal temperature, but I can't stop shivering. I keep hearing that whistle in my head, like a sound that follows me everywhere. My phone's battery is dropping again for no reason. It was at 50% 5 minutes ago. Now it's at 30%. My chest feels tight and my ears are ringing. I can't ignore this anymore. I don't know what exactly is in that corridor, or why it seems to be affecting me even outside of work. I do know that I haven't seen any vents or open windows that could explain that draft. I also know that none of the evidence I gathered stuck around. Everything was corrupted or drained. I'm not sure what my next step is. Part of me thinks I need to talk to my boss or maybe find someone who can investigate properly, but I doubt they'll take me seriously. I don't have any physical proof, just weird phone glitches and a messed up camcorder. All I have are these feelings, the cold, the whistle, and the heaviness that makes my body tense up. I don't think this is something that can be solved by a simple building inspection. It's something else, something that lingers in the dark corners of that hallway and now clings to me even when I leave. I can't say I'm scared of dying. There's been no mention of that, but I'm scared of losing my mind, like that ex-employee. I'm scared of ending up in a hospital bed, rambling about cold drafts and whistles that nobody else believes in. For now, I'm going to try to stay away from that corridor and see if this presence fades. If it doesn't, I might have to quit my job. That might sound extreme, but every time I feel that chill, I feel a piece of my sanity slip. Right now, all I can do is try to calm my breathing and hope I can get some sleep. Because I'm tired, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home again tonight, and no matter what I do, I can't escape that cold. I stepped through the hotel's front entrance with my rolling suitcase dragging across a cracked tile floor. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and musty carpets. I looked around and noticed worn chairs arranged around chipped wooden tables. No one else was there except a single clerk behind a tall, dusty reception desk. He nodded in my direction but didn't offer any pleasantries, so I asked for my room key. He handed it over and waved me down a hallway without saying much. I was in town for work, and I needed a cheap place to stay. This hotel fit my budget, but I could tell right away it had seen better days. I felt uneasy but shrugged it off. I walked to my assigned room on the second floor. The corridor lighting flickered and the walls showed stains of water damage. I passed several closed doors with tarnished brass numbers. When I reached my room, I unlocked the door and went inside. The room had an old bed with a squeaky box spring, a dresser with peeling veneer, and a small TV on a wobbly stand. I tossed my bag on the bed and sat down, feeling the spring sag. The air felt warm and stale, and the window had a cracked frame that let in a slight draft. I decided to open the window a little for fresh air, but it only budged a few inches. I freshened up in the cramped bathroom, noticing a slow drain in the sink. After splashing my face with water, I went back to the bed and checked my phone. I had a few work emails, but my signal was weak. The Wi-Fi was even worse, so I gave up on trying to connect and just sat there, staring at the old wallpaper. The pattern reminded me of something from the 1970s, brownish and dull. My eyes wandered to the door that led out to the hallway, and I felt a small wave of discomfort. Everything about this hotel looked run down, like it was stuck in some forgotten decade. Later that evening, I realized I needed some water and snacks. I walked down to the lobby and turned left, looking for a vending machine or maybe a small convenience nook. I saw a doorway that led to a set of stairs. A sign above it said basement. I didn't see a sign for any vending machines on the main floor, so I wondered if maybe the hotel had them downstairs. I decided to go down the steps to check. The staircase leading to the basement was poorly lit and the air smelled damp. The concrete steps were chipped and the walls were made of bare cinder blocks. When I reached the bottom, I found a long hallway with a few flickering bulbs overhead. I poked my head around and saw old storage rooms with half-open doors. Some contained stacks of old chairs and broken furniture. Others were locked. At the end of the hall, I saw a single door made of thick, rusted metal. It looked out of place in a hotel basement. I walked over to it and gave it a light push, but it didn't move. There was a heavy lock on the front, like something you'd see on an industrial refrigerator or an old bank vault. I stood there listening to the stillness in the hallway. I heard a faint drip of water somewhere, but that was it. No sounds of people, no vending machines, no mechanical hum. It was too quiet. I felt an odd sense of curiosity, so I tugged on the door again. It didn't budge. I looked around, noticed a small window set high in the wall near the ceiling, but it was too dirty and too high to see anything. After a few minutes, I shrugged and went back upstairs. I didn't mention it to anyone at the time, but the image of that locked door stuck in my head. Before heading back to my room, I asked the man at the front desk where I could get some water. He pointed me toward a rickety wooden cabinet that had a few water bottles. I picked one up and paid. Then, as an afterthought, I asked him if the hotel had a basement vending machine. He frowned and said he didn't think so. I told him I saw a locked metal door downstairs. He looked puzzled and said he wasn't aware of any door like that. I pressed him a little more, but he shrugged. I left the lobby and went to my room, still curious but too tired to push further. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The bed springs dug into my back and the thin walls did little to block out noise. I heard doors slam in the hallway, distant sounds of coughing, and a steady drip from somewhere outside my window. Around 2 a.m, I was about to drift off when I heard muffled voices. At first, I assumed they were coming from another guest's room, or maybe from somewhere outside, but the sound felt closer. I sat up, straining to identify the direction. It sounded like it was coming from below me, almost underneath the floor. The words were indistinct, like a low conversation. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the floor. I couldn't make out any specific words, but it definitely sounded like at least 2 people talking. My pulse picked up and I felt a tingling sensation at the back of my neck. I pulled on some pants and shoes, deciding I'd go check the hallway or see if anyone else heard it. But when I opened my door, the corridor was quiet and empty. The overhead lights buzzed. I walked around but heard nothing. I told myself it might be pipes or some weird echo. I went back into my room, locked the door, and lay down. The voices came and went for another hour, sometimes stopping, sometimes starting again. By the time I finally fell asleep, I was restless and unsettled. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff back and bags under my eyes. I had to attend a business meeting, so I quickly dressed and left the hotel to find a nearby coffee shop. I spent the day at a client's office trying to focus on presentations and paperwork. My mind, though, kept drifting back to the strange sounds and that locked metal door. I felt a sense of unease whenever I remembered the faint conversation I'd heard overnight. After my work obligations wrapped up in the late afternoon, I returned to the hotel. The sun was setting and the lobby was dim. The same desk clerk nodded at me as I walked by, but I didn't feel like trying to chat. I headed straight for the basement stairs. I wanted to see that door again. This time, I wasn't going to tap it lightly. I wanted to see if there was a chance it might open or if someone was down there. I made my way down the old concrete steps, flicking on the lights as I went. The hallway seemed darker than before, but that might have been my imagination. I approached the door and noticed it was slightly ajar. Yesterday it had been locked tight. Now it stood open just a crack. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel my fingers trembling slightly as I reached out to push it open wider. The door groaned on its hinges. I stepped through. The room beyond was bigger than I expected. A single overhead light fixture cast a weak glow. There was an old bed with a metal frame in the corner, a wooden chest at its foot, and a small table with a broken lamp. Everything looked like it was from decades ago. The bedding was a faded floral pattern, and the mattress on the bed had sagging corners. There was a musty odor, like old fabric and stale air. I took a cautious step inside. I scanned the place. I saw no sign of anyone, but the bed looked like someone had just been sitting on it. The sheets were slightly rumpled, and the mattress had a fresh imprint. I walked closer and placed my hand on the sheets. They were warm in one spot, but I told myself that might be my imagination. I felt a prickling sensation on my arms, like goosebumps, and my mouth went dry. I glanced around for any sign of personal belongings, clothes, shoes, luggage, but there was nothing, just old furniture. I bent down to look under the bed. Nothing. I lifted the lid of the wooden chest and it was empty. I heard something behind me, a faint shuffle like a footstep on the concrete. I spun around and saw no one, but the door leading back to the hallway was now wide open. I felt a jolt of adrenaline and rushed toward it. I looked down the hall in both directions. It was empty. I poked my head out, listening for any movement. Then I heard the slightest click, like a door latch engaging. I turned back to the metal door, but it wasn't moving. I checked the hallway doors, but none seemed out of place. I decided I didn't want to stay in that basement any longer. I walked quickly to the stairs, my hands shaking. Once back on the lobby level, I looked around for the desk clerk, but he wasn't there. I hurried up to my room, locked the door, and put on the chain. I felt short of breath, and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My mind was racing, replaying the sight of that empty room with the warm spot on the bed. That night, I kept my lights on. I told myself I'd try to sleep, but I knew it was going to be a long night. Around midnight, I heard the voices again. This time, they were clearer, like they were right under my room. I recognized two distinct tones, one low and one slightly higher. They spoke in a hushed manner, but I couldn't catch any specific words. My skin crawled. I felt goosebumps on my arms and neck. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. I left my bed and walked into the hallway. I didn't want to hear these noises alone in my room. The hallway lights flickered, and I noticed the door to the stairwell was propped open. I glanced inside and saw darkness. I had a crazy urge to go back down, but my body resisted. My stomach churned at the thought of entering that basement again in the middle of the night. I decided to stand in the hallway for a while, hoping the voices would fade. After a few minutes, they did, but it felt like the entire hotel was pressing in on me, like the walls were too close. I headed back into my room and shut the door, flipping the deadbolt. In the morning, I woke up exhausted. The same pattern of voices coming and going had kept me half awake. My eyes burned. I debated checking out and finding another place. But I already paid for the week, and I wasn't in the mood to fight with management over a refund. I also felt compelled to figure out what was going on with that basement. Something about it made me feel like I needed answers. It was a strange mix of fear and curiosity, like a trap I couldn't avoid. Later that day, I stopped by the front desk and asked a different employee about the basement. This time, it was an older woman working. She stared at me blankly and said the hotel only used the basement for storage. I asked if she was sure there wasn't a hidden room or an old suite. She shook her head. I decided not to press any further because she seemed annoyed. I went back upstairs and prepared for another restless night. That evening, I paced in my room, trying to decide if I should go back to the basement. Something told me I needed to see that room again. Around 9 p.m., I mustered the courage and crept down the stairs. The corridor was quiet. When I reached the basement door, it was locked. I jiggled the handle, No luck. I went down the hall, found the metal door, and saw it was shut. This time, it looked locked again. I felt a surge of relief and disappointment at the same time. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a faint whispering sound from inside that room. It was brief, maybe a second or two. I stood there, my body tense. I felt a chill on my arms and my throat went tight. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to fling that door open and confront whoever was in there. I took a step closer. The door stayed still. I tapped it lightly, just once. No response. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. After a few seconds, I turned around and headed back to the stairs, practically jogging. I didn't want to be in that hallway anymore. When I reached the top, the desk clerk was there staring at me. I didn't explain what I was doing. I walked to my room, locked myself in, and stayed put. That night, the voices came back again, steady and unnerving. I couldn't sleep. My body was on edge, and I kept thinking about that bed with the fresh imprint on the mattress. It felt like whoever occupied that room knew I was poking around. I kept imagining that if I walked down there again, I'd find the bed warm, the sheets indented, and maybe even footsteps leading away. I felt watched, like there were eyes on me whenever I moved. My hands trembled every time I tried to get comfortable. The adrenaline wouldn't leave my system. On my final morning at the hotel, I woke up feeling hollow. I was exhausted, jumpy, and ready to leave. I packed my suitcase and went downstairs to check out. The lobby was empty, except for a single bell on the desk. I rang it. The same desk clerk arrived from a back room. He handed me a receipt. As I turned to leave, I glanced at the door to the basement stairs. It was closed. I heard nothing. Part of me felt a strong urge to sprint out of there and never look back. Another part wanted to open that basement door one more time, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I stepped outside into the morning air and took a deep breath. The tension in my chest loosened a little as soon as I left the building. I loaded my suitcase into my car and started the engine. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of a basement window on the side of the hotel. It was hard to see inside, but I thought I spotted a shadow move. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was someone watching me drive off. I didn't experience any horrific tragedy. I didn't see a ghost. I didn't end up injured or anything like that. But the echo of those voices stayed with me for days. Sometimes I still hear that low conversation in the back of my mind, like it followed me out of that place. I can't shake the feeling that if I had stayed another night, I might not have left so easily. I keep thinking about that room and wondering who or what had been lying in that bed right before I found it. Now and then, I dream about standing in front of that metal door, hearing someone whisper my name from the other side. It's not violent or bloody. It's just a slow, creeping sense that I came close to becoming the next permanent occupant of that hidden room, the next guest in a place that doesn't let you go. I can't prove anything, but I know those voices were real, and that room wasn't just a piece of old furniture. Something was there, and it wanted to be found. Even now, I double-check the locks when I stay in a hotel. I listen for unusual sounds in the walls or floors. I make sure there's no secret hallway or locked iron door hidden away. But every so often, I think back on that night. My chest tightens, and I feel my skin prickle. I don't tell people the story often because it sounds impossible. But I know what I heard, I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. I was never physically harmed, but there's a certain kind of lingering fear that never really goes away. And that's enough to remind me that some places hold on to their secrets, and sometimes those secrets grab hold of you if you let them. I moved into this old townhouse about 6 weeks ago. I knew it was over 100 years old, but I figured I could handle some creaking floors and rattling pipes. I expected dusty corners and old wallpaper. I didn't expect to walk through the hallway in the evening and hear low voices coming through the walls. I didn't expect my entire body to tense up while I pressed my ear against the plaster, trying to make sense of those hushed conversations. I didn't expect to feel like a stranger in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder and pausing at the smallest noise. I noticed the voices for the first time on a Thursday night. I was alone, unpacking boxes in the living room. My back hurt from lifting a few heavy pieces of furniture up the narrow stairs. I remember setting down a box of books and hearing something. It was like a soft murmur drifting along the hallway wall. I thought it might be my neighbor next door, but the sound seemed to come from inside my house, not outside. I walked closer, listening. My heart rate went up because I couldn't figure out the exact source. I followed the sound down the hallway, toward the little alcove near the stairwell. The floor lamp cast a dull yellow glow on the old wooden boards. My steps felt heavy, and every shift of my weight caused a faint creak. When I reached the wall, the voices got slightly louder, but still impossible to understand. They sounded upset, maybe irritated, but not shouting. More like a tense discussion. I stood there trying not to breathe too loudly, pressing my ear against the wallpaper. My cheek felt the cold surface. I stayed there for about a minute, straining to catch a single word. Nothing was clear, just that same soft, frustrated tone. Then it stopped. After a few seconds of silence, I pulled back. I glanced around the empty hallway, half expecting someone to appear at the top of the stairs. No one was there. I shook my head and went back to unpacking. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it was just old plumbing or some trick of acoustics. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't stop thinking about how those voices had seemed so close. A few days later, I heard them again, this time when I was carrying laundry up to my bedroom. My arms were full of clothes, and I paused at the same spot in the hallway. The voices were there, low and tense. My heart pounded. I set the laundry basket down. My breathing became shallow, and I felt my palms get sweaty. I leaned in and listened again. I heard at least two distinct tones. One voice sounded higher, like a hushed complaint, and the other a lower, more frustrated rumble. I tried to make out words, but it was just a series of muted syllables. I felt a jolt in my chest when, after a few seconds, the lower voice seemed to direct itself toward me. It was like it sensed I was eavesdropping. I heard a faint shift in volume, almost like it was speaking directly into the wall. I jumped back and lost my grip on the laundry basket. My clothes spilled onto the floor. My mouth went dry and my eyes darted around, but I saw no movement. Nothing changed in the hallway except my crumpled t-shirts on the ground. I bent down, picked up the clothes, and hurried to my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to slow my breath. My hands were trembling. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I stood there for a couple of minutes, listening for any footsteps in the hallway. There were none. I eventually dropped the laundry on the bed and turned on every light in my room. I kept telling myself I was just tired or stressed. Maybe I was imagining things. But the voices felt real. I decided to test my theory. A few nights later, I bought a small handheld recorder. I waited until it was quiet outside, past midnight, and stood in front of that wall again. The floorboards felt cold under my socks. My shoulders were stiff, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I clicked the record button and pressed it against the wallpaper. I heard the voices, soft and urgent, but I couldn't make out any words. They kept that same tense, muffled tone. Sometimes I thought I heard a slight escalation in volume, but it never turned into shouting. It was more like a heated argument stuck on low volume. I recorded for a good 5 minutes, feeling my hands shake every time the voices seemed to shift. Then I went to my bedroom, shut the door, and played it back. I held my breath, leaning close to the recorder's tiny speaker. All I heard was static and the faint hum of background noise. No voices, no murmurs. Just nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. I felt my stomach tighten. It made no sense. I heard them so clearly with my own ears, yet the recorder picked up nothing. The next day, I called a local historian. I asked if anything strange had happened in this house. I didn't mention ghosts or anything like that, but I asked about events, accidents, or anything suspicious. She said she had no record of any serious incident. The house had changed owners a few times. It had served as a boarding house for a short period, then a private residence. According to her, everything was normal. I reached out to a friend who's a contractor. I told him I heard noises in the walls. He asked if I had rodents or old pipes. I told him it sounded like voices, not scratching or water movement. He came over with some tools, knocked on a few sections of the wall, and checked the basement for any sign of leaks or structural problems. He found nothing. He said everything looked solid for a house of its age. Then he stood in the hallway with me for a while, waiting for the sounds. We heard absolutely nothing. He left, probably thinking I was jumpy. The thing is, I started hearing the voices more often, usually late at night or early in the morning. They never got louder than a soft murmur. Sometimes they sounded sad or regretful, like someone was apologizing in a low tone. Other times they sounded angry or sharp. I always felt this uneasy prickling at the back of my neck. My pulse would speed up and my stomach would clench. I'd get this urge to just walk out of the house and not come back. But I had nowhere else to go, and a mortgage to pay. I tried cleaning that section of the hallway wall, hoping it was just some weird resonance. I wiped it down with soap and water. I tried tapping my own knuckles against it, hoping to find a hollow spot that might explain acoustics. The wall seemed normal. Painted plaster over old lath. There was no hidden speaker or vent. I thought maybe the neighbor's television or radio was carrying through, but the floor plan doesn't line up that way. The neighbor's house is adjacent to my living room wall, not the hallway. I tried standing in different parts of the house and listening for the same voices. In most areas, I heard only normal creaks and the faint buzz of overhead lights. But in the hallway, sometimes in the stairwell and once in the upstairs corridor leading to the attic, I could hear them. The tone was always the same. Muffled words, a tense or sad feeling. No distinct phrases. It was driving me up the wall. I could feel my nerves getting more frayed as the days went on. I had trouble sleeping, waiting for them to start up again. One night, I decided to confront it. I stood there at around 2 a.m. The hallway light was dim. My feet were cold on the old hardwood. I placed my hand on the wall. My heart was pounding in my chest. I felt a slight vibration, almost like a rumble, and the voices drifted into focus. I pressed my ear against the wall, so close that my hair brushed against the peeling wallpaper. The higher voice was speaking slowly, and the lower voice sounded frustrated or impatient. My stomach tightened, and I felt a tingling in my fingertips. Then I spoke out loud. I said, "Hello? Can you hear me?" My own voice sounded shaky. The murmuring paused. I heard a faint shifting sound like fabric rustling on the other side. Then the lower voice rumbled in a direct way. I couldn't tell what it said, but the tone was definitely directed at me. I jerked back, my heart thudding. I scanned the hallway, half expecting to see shadows or a person. The light fixture flickered for a second, but that might have just been the old wiring. My legs felt weak. I actually had to lean against the banister to steady myself. After that, I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. I know it's not rational because if these voices can travel through walls, a simple door isn't much of a barrier, but it made me feel safer. My nighttime routine changed. I would double-check all the windows and doors, turn on a small lamp in the living room, and then hurry upstairs. The house would be mostly silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator or the occasional groan from the old foundation. But every so often, as I was drifting off, I'd hear a faint murmur coming from the hallway. I'd sit up in bed, straining to listen. By the time I got out of bed and stood at the doorway, the noise would stop. I invited a coworker over for dinner one weekend, hoping some normal conversation would steady my nerves. We had pizza and a few beers in the kitchen. I tried to relax, but I kept expecting the voices to start up. He noticed I was distracted and asked if I was okay. I just shrugged and said I was tired. When he used the bathroom, he passed through the hallway and paused. He told me later he thought he heard something, like the house was settling, but he didn't mention voices. After he left, the house felt even quieter. I watched TV until past midnight, then turned everything off and headed up the stairs. My body felt heavy and tense. I got halfway up and heard a soft voice behind me. It sounded breathy like a whisper, but I couldn't make out words. My entire body went rigid. I spun around, hand on the railing, but the staircase was empty. The hallway light revealed the old walls and the framed painting I'd hung near the floor lamp. Everything looked normal. The sound had vanished. I felt my heart beating all the way in my throat. My legs were shaky. I took the stairs faster than usual, entered my room, and locked the door. That night I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of a drawer closing in the next room. My mouth felt dry and my chest felt tight. I glanced at the door, listening for footsteps. There was nothing else, no creaking floors, no rattling doorknob. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and tried to calm down. I got out of bed and opened the door slightly, peering out into the hallway. The air felt chilly. I saw no one. I stood there for a few seconds, the hair on my arms standing up. Then I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep well for the rest of the night. Every day, I consider moving out. But I've poured my savings into this place, and I can't justify leaving. I also feel like I'd be running away from something I don't understand. The voices haven't harmed me physically. They just won't leave me alone. It's like they're stuck in the walls. Sometimes I wonder if they're aware of me or if I'm just picking up some echo from the past. I try not to dwell on that. It doesn't help me sleep at night. I keep the lights on in most rooms now, especially in the hallway. I installed brighter bulbs. I've also tested the walls for any hidden openings, but I found nothing. When I press my ear against certain spots, I still hear them. The voices come and go, never staying long, never letting me understand what they're saying. I catch hints of anger, regret, maybe sadness. It's unnerving. My heart usually speeds up and my neck muscles feel tight. My breath comes in short gasps, and I have to walk away to catch my composure. Some nights, I sit in the living room with the TV on low volume. I tell myself that if I ignore the voices, maybe they'll fade, but they don't. Every so often, I'll hear that faint hum through the walls, like a conversation that never ends. I've tried yelling at them. Once I shouted, "Shut up and leave me alone." My voice echoed in the empty house. I felt foolish afterward. The murmurs continued a moment later, unaffected by my outburst. I've looked into soundproofing, but it's expensive, and I'm not even sure it would help. I can't figure out if these voices are actual sounds or if I'm somehow imagining them. The fact that they never show up on recordings makes me doubt my own senses sometimes. Yet every time I lean in and listen, the vibrations feel real. My chest tightens and my hair stands on end. I know I'm not just hearing the wind or the pipes. It's been 6 weeks, and I'm still here. I'm getting better at coping, but the tension lingers. I keep the radio on at night to drown out the murmurs. I walk quickly through the hallway, avoiding long pauses. I try not to listen too closely. When I have guests over, I stay downstairs, and we don't linger near the walls. Nobody else has heard the voices yet, at least not clearly enough to mention. I wonder if it's just me. But every few nights I find myself drawn to that same wall. My hand hovers near the surface, and I feel a slight pulse in my fingertips. The voices filter through, always in that hushed, uneasy tone. Sometimes I lean in just for a second to see if anything has changed. It never does. They're still arguing, or maybe lamenting. It's always the same. I can't decode their words. I can't record them, and I can't make them stop. I live with them now. I sleep here, eat here, and exist alongside these invisible conversations that never seem to end. And every time I put my ear to the wall, I feel like I'm eavesdropping on something not meant for me. Yet they keep talking, and I keep listening, stuck in this old house that feels more crowded than it looks. And as long as I stay here, I suspect I'll always be sharing the space with them, whether I want to or not. I never wanted this house. My distant uncle left it to me in his will, and I signed the papers without much thought. I arrived a few weeks ago and tried to treat the place like any normal home. The roof didn't leak. The floors weren't creaky at first glance. and the walls didn't look like they'd cave in. It seemed stable enough, yet something felt wrong the moment I opened the front door. The air smelled stale, and there was a quiet draft that ran through the hallway even when all the windows were shut. It was only on my third night that I started hearing those noises upstairs. They sounded like footsteps or shuffling. I couldn't tell if it was an animal or just the house settling. But the more I listened, the more I realized it was coming from the attic. I tried to ignore it at first, but it got louder each night. Eventually, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check it out. I remember walking up those narrow stairs that lead to the attic. They creaked under my weight, like they hadn't been stepped on in years. My heart pounded in my chest. The darkness around me felt heavy and cold. I heard that same shuffling sound maybe 6 feet ahead. I stopped at the top step and held my breath, shining the flashlight in slow arcs. There were old boxes stacked against the sloped ceiling, all of them covered in a thick layer of dust. I smelled something musty, like wet cardboard and rotting wood. When I moved closer, my shoes kicked up dust clouds that made me cough. I saw no movement at first, just shadows dancing under the weak beam of my flashlight. Then I heard a scraping noise against one wall. My pulse sped up. I turned my flashlight toward the sound and thought I saw something. It was a shape near the far corner, crouched low with long limbs and bony shoulders. I froze. I couldn't make out its face or features, but I saw a faint outline of its ribcage rising and falling with each breath. The thing huffed softly, like it was struggling to inhale. My hands started shaking. I felt sweat roll down the side of my face. I swallowed hard and tried to step closer, but the moment I moved, the shape slid away into the darkness. I didn't see it run. It just moved out of the flashlight's range, and I heard another scraping sound on the floor. I followed the noise, but all I found were a few long scratches on the wooden boards. They looked fresh. Tiny shards of wood curled at the edges of these marks, and I could see how they ran in parallel grooves like claws had done them. My stomach churned as I pictured that shape having claws. I checked around the area, but it was gone. I listened for breathing and heard nothing. After a few minutes, I realized I was standing there in total silence, still holding my flashlight out. I went back downstairs, locked my bedroom door, and tried to sleep. My mind wouldn't calm down. I stared at the dark ceiling, going over all the details in my head, asking myself if I was seeing things. The next morning, I woke up feeling shaky. I walked around the house, checking each room. Everything looked normal on the ground floor. In the daylight, the place almost felt harmless. I opened the fridge for some orange juice and noticed my hands still trembling. That was when I decided to look through some of my uncle's old papers. I found them in the study, shoved in a desk drawer. There were letters, old receipts, and property documents. None of them mentioned anything about the attic. Nothing indicated he kept some strange pet up there, or that he believed there was anything dangerous inside. I spent the afternoon trying to put it out of my mind. I stepped into the living room and flipped through channels on the TV, hoping to distract myself. But every so often I glanced at the ceiling, expecting to hear that noise again. Around dinner time, I decided to make a sandwich. The bread smelled fine, but my appetite was barely there. My fingers were still unsteady. My thoughts kept circling back to that shape, its bony outline, and that raspy breathing. I told myself it might have been an animal, maybe a large raccoon or a stray cat. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. That night, I tried to settle in early, but I couldn't sleep for more than an hour at a time. I woke up around 2 a.m. to that same scraping, this time a bit louder. It sounded like claws on the attic floor, moving back and forth. I lay there in bed, my heart pounding, trying to decide if I should go back up. My pulse throbbed in my temples, my jaw clenched until it hurt. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, a baseball bat I found in a closet, and headed to the attic stairs. When I reached the top, my nerves were wound so tight that every tiny sound made me jump. I scanned the attic with the flashlight. The beam lit up dust particles floating in the air. I saw the same old boxes, the same cramped space. Then I heard a heavy exhale behind one stack of boxes. I stepped around them, shining the light over the floor. That was when I found more claw marks, longer this time. They carved into the wood in jagged patterns. It looked like the creature had been dragging its nails while circling that spot. I moved the flashlight up to the boxes, and that's when I saw it again, its pale skin and sunken eyes. It was crouched so low that its chest nearly touched the floor. It had bony arms with long, thin fingers. Its ribs looked sharp under its skin. It stared at me for a second before slithering backward, disappearing into the shadows. I yelled for it to stop. My voice cracked with nerves. I tried to give chase, swinging the flashlight around and moving behind the boxes. Nothing. I just found more dust and old junk. There was no trapdoor or hidden corridor. It was like it slipped through the walls. My mind raced. My breathing got so fast I had to lean on a box to steady myself. I rubbed my eyes, doubting my own vision. But then I spotted a few more fresh scratches on the wall, deep enough to peel off splinters. I traced them with my fingertips and felt the rough edges. That was real. It had to be real. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, my head felt hot, and I had a dull ache at the base of my skull. My hands were shaky, and I felt cold even though it was warm outside. I tried to go about my routine. I took a shower, but I found myself checking behind the shower curtain every few seconds, convinced I might see that crouched figure. I drank some coffee and paced around the living room, considering my options. Part of me wanted to run out of the house and never look back, but I felt stuck because I had inherited the place and I didn't have anywhere else to go. I thought about calling the police, but I had no idea what I'd tell them. There's some kind of creature in my attic that leaves claw marks? They'd probably think I was messing with them. Around midday, I forced myself to go back to the attic, this time with my phone's camera on record. I wanted to document something, anything. I opened the attic door and climbed up slowly, phone in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other. The floor was silent. The dust was thick. I walked around, filming every corner, every box, every crack in the walls. For a moment, I thought it was gone for good. Then I noticed some torn pieces of cloth near the far wall. They looked old and dirty. They were bunched up like a nest. My flashlight caught a few strands of hair tangled in the cloth. I didn't recognize it as animal fur. It looked too long, too fine. My pulse kicked up again. I took a step back, worried that it might be hiding nearby. I scanned the entire attic, but it was nowhere in sight. I spent a few hours that afternoon in the living room, going through those old boxes that I dragged down from the attic. Most of them held my uncle's belongings, photos, letters, receipts, and random keepsakes. None of it explained what I was seeing. There were no diaries, no journals, nothing that indicated he'd experienced anything strange. I kept hearing little sounds overhead, though, like faint scratching or occasional thumps. My nerves were frayed. Every time I heard a noise, my muscles tensed up. My mouth went dry. I had to remind myself to breathe. Later that day, I walked outside to get some air. The house stands on a quiet street with only a few neighbors. There's a tall hedge on each side of the property, and the backyard is mostly overgrown grass. I didn't see anything unusual out there. No tracks, no signs of a break-in. The attic windows are small and high off the ground, making it hard for anything to come or go that way. I stood in the yard looking at that attic window. It felt like I was being watched from inside. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. When evening came, I prepared myself for another long night. I ate a quick dinner. The food tasted bland, or maybe I just had no appetite left. My stomach felt twisted, and I kept getting chills. I turned on every light in the house, hoping to keep it away, but around midnight I heard a loud thump from the attic. My whole body jerked at the sound. I grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. My heart hammered in my chest. The air smelled stale again, like mildew. I climbed the stairs step by step, focusing on my breathing. The attic door was already ajar. I pushed it open and entered. The silence that greeted me was almost worse than any noise. I scanned the space with the flashlight and saw new claw marks on the far wall. They looked deeper than before, like it was scraping furiously at the wood. A sudden crash behind me made me spin around. One of the boxes had tipped over, spilling old newspapers and letters across the floor. My flashlight swept over them, and then I saw movement in the corner. The creature was there, huddled low. I heard it panting, each breath wet and raspy. I stepped toward it with the flashlight trembling in my hand. It crawled back, pressing itself against the wall. I stood there, staring at it, my mind racing. Its eyes looked dull, and its limbs twitched. I felt the urge to speak, but I had no idea what to say. My throat locked up. The creature lifted one arm, and I saw the tips of its fingers, long nails, dirty and cracked. I sensed it was terrified or angry. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. Then in a single moment it darted past me, almost brushing against my leg. I stumbled to the side and heard it vanish down the stairs. Its footsteps were erratic, not steady or rhythmic. I rushed after it, but by the time I got to the bottom of the stairs there was no sign of it. The house was silent. I checked every room in a panic. The kitchen was empty. The living room was dark, but nothing was there. The front door was locked, windows all secure. No broken glass, no forced entry. I stood in the middle of the hallway, every muscle tense, waiting for another noise. My breathing was fast, and my hands were soaked with sweat. I turned on the hall light and pressed my back to the wall, struggling to think. I realized I had no clue what I was dealing with. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It looked almost human, but too thin, too pale, with eyes that seemed lost. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the couch with the flashlight in my lap, eyes on the hallway, listening. I flinched at every creak, every groan of the old house. My mind felt crowded with doubts. Should I call someone? A friend? The cops? Animal control? But I had no proof that would make sense to anyone else. I had some claw marks and a shaky video of an empty attic. I decided to wait it out until morning. I dozed off around 5 a.m., only to wake up an hour later with a stiff neck and the taste of stale coffee in my mouth. When daylight came, I felt a small wave of relief, like the creature wouldn't bother me in the sunlight. I didn't hear anything from the attic all morning, so I took a chance and went up there again. The claw marks on the wall were still there, deeper than ever. The floor had scratches and circles, as though it had been pacing. A few boxes were overturned, and old papers lay scattered around. The air felt thick, hard to breathe in. My lungs felt tight. I noticed a spot near the window where the dust was disturbed, like maybe it had rested there. I went over and saw some oily smudges on the floor, shaped like elongated hands. Now I keep hearing it at random times of the day or night. Sometimes the sound is soft, almost a dragging noise. Other times it's a loud thump or a scrape that makes me jump. I haven't seen it again up close since it rushed past me, but I feel it watching. When I'm in the kitchen, I sense eyes on the back of my neck. When I'm in the study, I hear faint breathing in the corner. I spin around with my flashlight, and there's nothing there. Then I find fresh gouges in the walls or scratches in the floors. My throat tightens whenever I see new damage. It reminds me I'm not imagining this. I haven't found any remains of dead animals or any blood. I haven't seen any sign that it wants to kill me, but the tension in this house builds every day. I avoid the attic now, but that doesn't stop the noises. Sometimes I hide in my bedroom with the door locked, but that sense of being trapped keeps me on edge. My heart races, my hands shake, and I can't focus on anything but the next time I'll hear it moving. I'm tired all the time, and my stomach is in knots. I feel like the walls are closing in on me. I want to find a way out of this situation, but I'm not sure what to do. If I leave, I lose the house and all the belongings I inherited. If I stay, I risk losing my mind. Each day that passes, I feel more paranoid. Every little noise makes my hair stand on end. I've started sleeping with the flashlight under my pillow. The door to the attic stays locked, but I still hear it up there at night, pacing, scraping, breathing. My heart pounds even now as I recall it crouching in the corner. This is where I am right now, alone in a house that refuses to be normal. I'm wide awake, writing down everything that's happened so I can keep track of what's real. My palms are sweaty, and I feel a draft that I can't locate. I keep glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open. My nerves are shot, and I'm fighting the urge to get in my car and drive away. But some part of me needs to know what it is, or why it's here. As long as it's hiding in the shadows, I can't rest. And every night I hear it moving closer. I'm stuck. I can't keep living like this, waiting for the next scrape or the next glimpse of those hollow eyes. But I also can't face it head on without feeling like my heart will jump out of my chest. There's no sign of death or destruction, but the constant tension is wearing me down. I feel cornered in my own home. My body is stiff from lack of sleep, and my head buzzes with fear. I don't know how much longer I can hold it together. Every step I take in this house feels like a step closer to losing my mind. And the worst part is that I don't see a way to stop it. It's here, it's real, and I can't escape the sound of it breathing just beyond my line of sight. I found this old journal in a beat-up dresser that I almost threw out. I was clearing out the spare room yesterday when I spotted a little drawer stuck halfway open. Inside, there was a worn notebook with a faded leather cover. I flipped through the pages and saw detailed notes about rituals in the basement of this house. The handwriting belonged to someone who used to live here. He described strange gatherings and symbols carved into the concrete. He claimed these symbols gave him visions of spirits. I felt a jolt of adrenaline because I never thought anything like that could be hidden in my home. I decided to keep reading, and the more I read, the more I wanted to see if those markings were real. I took a flashlight and headed downstairs. That was 2 weeks ago, and I can't shake the tension I've felt since. The basement in my house is pretty plain at first glance. There's a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, a cement floor, and some shelves stacked with old tools and boxes. The air down there always feels heavy, and it smells like damp concrete. I walked around with my flashlight, aiming it at the walls and the corners. I didn't see anything unusual right away, but a part of me was sure there had to be something. The journal talked about carvings on the floor and on some of the pillars. I moved a few dusty boxes aside, crouched down, and found scratches in the concrete near one of the support posts. They didn't look random. There were small circular shapes and lines that seemed too deliberate to be normal wear and tear. I placed my palm over them and felt tiny ridges under my fingertips. I remember flipping back to a certain page in the journal that explained a kind of code. The writer mentioned that these symbols had to be read in a certain sequence and that each shape supposedly represented a gateway or a guide to contact ancient voices. He insisted that reading them out loud or even mentally acknowledging them opened a door to some other plane. I'll admit I didn't take it seriously at first. I thought it was just the ramblings of someone with an overactive imagination. But as soon as I finished reading that part, I felt this chill on the back of my neck. It didn't feel like a normal goosebump moment. My skin prickled and I got lightheaded. I stepped back from the carved shapes and just stared, wondering if I should keep going or leave well enough alone. I decided to keep going. I got some cleaning supplies, a brush, and a wet rag. I kneeled down and scrubbed the area until I could see the carvings more clearly. They were arranged in a circle about the size of a dinner plate. The symbols overlapped like puzzle pieces. Some were triangles, others had spirals, and a few were geometric shapes I didn't recognize. My mind kept jumping to the description in the journal. The previous occupant wrote about chanting in the basement, about hearing voices echoing from the corners when he repeated certain phrases. I hadn't heard anything yet, but something about the silence in that basement felt different. I stayed down there for a few hours. I took pictures with my phone and compared them to the drawings in the journal. The shapes matched almost perfectly. Every so often I thought I heard soft clicks or faint tapping sounds. I'd pause and look around, but I never saw anything. My heart rate would spike though, and I caught myself breathing too quickly. My hands were clammy, and I kept wiping my forehead because sweat kept forming even though the basement was cold. After a while, I realized I needed a break. I went back upstairs, made a cup of coffee, and tried to collect my thoughts. The journal sat on my kitchen table with pages bent and corners dog-eared. I felt a strange urge to go back and read more. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was like an itch in my skull that I needed to scratch. I ended up reading the entire journal in one sitting. It wasn't very long, maybe 30 pages of handwritten notes. The writer never said his name, but he mentioned that he lived alone in this house for a year. He wrote about a transformative experience that started when he found those carvings. He said that once he deciphered them, he began to see shapes moving in the corners of his vision. He heard whispers at night. At first he tried to ignore it, but the more he pushed it away, the stronger it got. Then he decided to embrace it by performing simple rituals at midnight, using candles and chanting phrases he wrote down. According to him, that opened something inside him. He started to sense presences around him, not just at night, but all the time. By the last pages, his notes became frantic, like he was desperate to share everything before he lost his nerve. He warned that anyone who tried to read and understand these symbols would awaken a dormant sense that can't be turned off. I didn't perform any rituals, at least not the kind he described, but I did start to read the symbols out loud. I just tried pronouncing them like they were letters from an old language. The basement felt different once I did that. The ceiling seemed lower, and the shadows in the corners looked darker. A few days later, I started hearing murmurs when I went down there, especially if I said those sounds again. I couldn't make out actual words, but it sounded like a hushed conversation happening just under my hearing range. After a while, it got to the point where I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed and think about the basement. I'd imagine footsteps right above my own in the hallway. My eyes would pop open and I'd stare at the walls, listening to my own heartbeat thump in my ears. About a week after I found the journal, I noticed a new symptom. My skin felt sensitive, especially on my arms and hands. It started during the night. I woke up feeling pins and needles in my forearms. They weren't numb. They just tingled as if something was buzzing under the surface. I rubbed them, trying to make it stop, but the tingling kept returning. I also felt heaviness in my chest, like a small weight pressing down on me. When I glanced at myself in the bathroom mirror, I didn't see anything unusual, but I felt out of place. It was almost like I was looking at someone else's reflection, but I recognized my face. That morning, I avoided the basement. I told myself I had to check my email and run errands. Deep down, I knew I was stalling. By the next night, the noises grew louder. They weren't just faint clicks anymore. I heard tapping that seemed to follow me around when I walked through the house. Sometimes I'd pause in the hallway, hold my breath, and wait. Then I'd hear a slight tap on the floor behind me. My muscles tensed up. My neck felt stiff. The hair on my arms stood on end. I turned around quickly and pointed my flashlight, but I only saw the hallway walls and the floor. No footprints, no movement, just empty space. I had trouble swallowing and my mouth felt dry. My heartbeat was so loud I thought I could hear it echo in my eardrums. I forced myself to laugh it off, but the laugh sounded shaky, even to me. Each day I'd go down to the basement to look at the symbols again. I'd trace them with my fingers, pressing down, sometimes until my fingertips turned white. I was trying to see if they had any texture or depth that I hadn't noticed before. I became obsessed with comparing them to the journal sketches. I even sketched them on blank paper to see if writing them myself changed anything. That's when the first real sighting happened. I was kneeling in front of the carved symbols with my phone in my hand, snapping pictures. Out of nowhere, I saw a quick movement off to my right. It looked like a shadow sliding across the wall. It wasn't my shadow. I stood up so fast that my knee popped. My breathing got ragged and my arms felt shaky. I pointed my flashlight in that direction and didn't see anything. I walked around, checking each corner. Nothing was there. But that moment still haunts me because it felt so real. I felt the presence of someone or something trying to escape my line of sight. That night I lay in bed listening for any sound. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like a soft thud coming from the basement. My stomach twisted, and my heart pounded hard. My mind raced with images of that shadow figure. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. I wanted to stay under the blankets, but a sense of compulsion pulled me. I grabbed the flashlight, walked out of the bedroom, and carefully made my way to the basement door. My throat felt tight, and I could taste a metallic tang in my mouth. My palms were damp against the flashlight's handle. When I opened the basement door, I caught a whiff of stale air. I flicked the light switch. The single bulb buzzed and lit up the space. I went down the steps, one at a time, my muscles clenched so tight that my shoulders ached. I scanned the basement from left to right. The shelves stood where I left them, boxes stacked up, and my cleaning supplies were on the floor. Everything looked normal at first, but then I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, speaking in a low murmur. My heart hammered in my chest. I moved the flashlight beam along the floor until I reached the carved symbols. I noticed a slight motion in the shadows near the pillar, but I couldn't tell if it was my imagination. I stepped closer, listening to my own short, shaky breaths. The basement felt colder than usual. The whispering continued, and I couldn't make out any words, but it felt like they were addressing me. My scalp tingled and my hands started to tremble. I stayed there for about 5 minutes, frozen in place, trying to figure out if I was losing my mind. The voices faded, then disappeared. The tension in my chest eased, and I suddenly realized I was shivering. I hurried back upstairs and locked the basement door. I sat on my couch, rubbing my arms, trying to calm down. My teeth chattered like I had a fever, but I checked my temperature and it was normal. At that point, I remembered the diary's last entries. The previous occupant wrote that once the connection started, it couldn't be undone. He mentioned feeling drawn to the basement at odd hours. He described tingling skin and a sense that his body was adapting to something from the other side. That word, adapting, kept looping in my mind while I sat there. I didn't want to accept it, but my body was reacting in ways I'd never experienced. The next few days turned into a blur of half-slept nights and anxious mornings. I'd wake up drenched in sweat. My arms tingled non-stop, and my legs felt heavy, like I was carrying extra weight. I started skipping meals because my appetite vanished. At work, I felt jumpy. Every time a phone rang or a door closed, I felt a jolt run through me. In the evenings, I'd find any excuse not to go into the basement, but I kept hearing faint tapping sounds or soft murmurs coming from below. I tried playing music to cover it up, but whenever the music stopped, those noises came back. I found myself drifting to the basement door, laying my ear against it, and listening. The sense of compulsion grew stronger each time. Last night I gave in again and went downstairs. The carvings looked sharper than before, as if the lines had deepened or expanded. I ran my fingers over them, and a jolt went through my arm. It felt like static electricity snapping against my skin, except it didn't hurt. It left a buzzing sensation that traveled from my fingertips to my shoulder. I felt a sudden wave of nausea, and I lurched forward, bracing myself on the pillar. My stomach churned, but I didn't throw up. I just stayed there, panting, trying to catch my breath. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw another shadowy figure. This time, it was definitely shaped like a person standing near the far wall. My heart almost stopped. I spun around and the figure was gone. The air felt thick. I coughed a couple times and headed back upstairs, stumbling on the last step. That brings me to tonight. My arms still tingle. My chest feels tight, and I'm having trouble focusing. I've been sitting at my kitchen table for an hour, staring at this journal. I keep rereading the pages about transformation and contact with spirits that roam between layers of reality. The writer's words describe a gradual shift in perception, as if the person can sense frequencies most people can't detect. He wrote that once this shift takes root, it's like having extra nerves that react to stimuli from beyond our world. I feel that in my bones. Every time I close my eyes, I see shapes swirling behind my eyelids. When I open them, I catch glimpses of motion in my peripheral vision. I can't deny it anymore. My body is opening up to something unseen, and it won't stop. I'm not planning on any dramatic move. I don't have the energy to do a full ritual or pack up and leave. I'm too tired, and I'm also strangely fascinated. My curiosity about what else might be on the other side grows with each passing day. I still have enough sense to feel worried about what this will do to me, but I can't turn off the urge to explore. My breathing is shallow right now, and my hands are shaking slightly as I write this. I'm determined to go back down there one more time. I want to see if the symbols change again or if I can hear those voices clearly enough to understand a single word. I'm ending this account because I need to stand up and do it. The basement door is right behind me. My flashlight is on the counter and I can feel my heart pounding. I'm hyper-aware of every movement in this house. My back is tense and sweat is gathering along my hairline. I have no idea what I'll find down there, but I can't turn back. My body doesn't feel entirely like mine anymore and I can't ignore the call. I'm going downstairs now. That's all I can say. I heard the first weird sound at 2 in the morning. I had finished recording a quick guitar loop and was about to power down my equipment. My headphones were still on my head and I felt a chill on my arms. The room was dark except for the small light on my mixing console. The sound came through my headphones without warning. It was like hushed voices, but I couldn't make out any words. It wasn't my guitar, and it wasn't any background noise I recognized. I froze. My eyes darted to the corners of my home studio. Nothing moved. I listened for a few more seconds, then I stopped the recording and replayed that last take. The voices were there, faint but clear enough to make me tense up. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. My face was stiff and my neck felt tight. I yanked off the headphones and turned on all the lights. That was how this entire thing started. When I woke up the next morning, I checked the audio file on my computer. I listened again, and this time I noticed something else in the track. There were these soft, rhythmic thumps behind the voices, like a slow drum beat. It repeated in uneven intervals, then faded, then came back. It made my stomach clench. I boosted the volume to confirm I wasn't imagining it. The voices and beats were not part of my guitar track. They sounded distant, like they came from a corridor or an old basement. My windows were closed and I live alone, so I had no idea where these noises could have come from. I scanned every channel, but the waveform showed something weird in the background. A pattern. It looked like a wave crest repeating every few seconds, but the shape was distorted. I didn't know what to think. I sat there, my shoulders tense, blinking at the screen. I decided to record again that night. I wanted to see if I could replicate the sound. Around midnight, I set up my mics and started playing a slow melody on my acoustic guitar. The room felt cold, but the temperature outside was normal. I checked my thermostat, but it showed the usual reading. My arms had goosebumps, and my chest felt tight. I tried to ignore it. I hit record. I played that melody 3 or 4 times. Then I paused the recording and went to the kitchen to drink some water. When I came back, I checked the track. At first, it sounded clean. Then near the end, I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like a few syllables in some language I didn't recognize. It reminded me of something ancient, with sharp consonants and breathy vowels. It made my back tense up. My mouth went dry. I decided to keep going. I recorded a bass line over the guitar. I turned up the gain on my microphone. While I was playing, I noticed a pulse in my ears. I assumed it was just my blood pressure, but it seemed to sync with something in the recording. That made me even more uneasy. I finished the take, then replayed it. The whisper had grown louder. I heard a sort of chant under my notes. My heart rate jumped. I kept shaking my head, trying to shake off the tension. I couldn't figure it out. I looked around the room. The walls were the same as always. The floor was still. The only sound was my computer's fan, but in the recording, it sounded like a small crowd whispering at the edges of the mix. I backed away from my desk. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the sweat on my palms. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next week, I tried different approaches. I changed cables. I moved my gear. I used a new set of microphones. The voices never stopped appearing. Sometimes they were only a murmur. Other times they were louder. Sometimes I thought I heard a single voice repeating a phrase I couldn't understand. Other times, there were multiple overlapping voices. Always that same undefined rhythm. It was too quiet to feel like a normal drum beat, but it kept a presence I couldn't ignore. During each recording session, my hands shook on the guitar frets or my keyboard keys. My chest got tight, and I'd get waves of goosebumps on my arms. My jaw clenched. I'd catch my reflection in the computer screen and see the worry on my face. I didn't like it at all. I started to notice these feelings creeping into my daily life. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom at night, and I'd hear faint rustling behind me, like fabric brushing against a wall. I'd turn around and see nothing. I took a shower and thought I heard a voice behind the curtain. I'd jerk my head around, my heart pounding, but I always found the bathroom empty. I tried to reassure myself that I was just on edge because of the recordings, but it kept happening. I'd sit in my living room trying to watch a movie, and I'd catch a whisper in the corner of the room. I'd pause the movie to listen, but the house stayed quiet. My breathing would get shallow. I'd rub my eyes, trying to reset my head. It never worked. I decided to check the entire apartment for any sign of a hidden speaker or a device left by someone as a prank. I took a flashlight and looked under every piece of furniture. I checked my vents. I stood on a chair and inspected the light fixtures. Nothing. I moved on to the studio. I unplugged every cable and inspected the walls for any cracks. I tested the entire system one piece at a time, plugging in only the microphone and the interface with no instruments. The voices appeared again when I recorded a blank track. They were faint, but they were there. I listened to that track 10 times in a row, feeling my heart hammer in my chest each time I heard the whispers. My scalp tingled. My breath got stuck in my throat. A few nights later, I tried to play a chord progression on my electric guitar. The amp hissed with the usual static at first. Then, during the playback, I heard something that sounded like a chant. It was deeper and more resonant than before, like a group of people exhaling a low note. It rose and fell in volume, clashing with my chords. My arms felt weak. My legs trembled. I had to sit down. There was no sign of anything out of place in the room, but I felt a force pressing on my body like a heavy weight on my chest. My heart raced. I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. After I stopped the playback, the feeling faded a bit, but it left me shaky. I tried to ignore it and focus on other projects. That didn't help. One day, while I was tuning my guitar, I noticed the tension in the strings sounded off. It was like the guitar had developed an odd resonance. I strummed a few open chords. The sustain sounded smooth at first, then I'd pick up this faint hum in the background. My brain connected it to those voices and rhythms from the recordings, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I tuned the guitar again, but it made no difference. I had the sense that something was blending with my sound. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. At night, I would sit on the edge of my bed and try to calm down. My bedroom was quiet. The hallway light was on. I kept the studio door shut. I wanted to distance myself from the gear, but I couldn't stop thinking about those strange voices. My pulse raced. My body felt on alert. I had trouble sleeping. I'd hear random pops or clicks in the apartment, and I'd tense up, expecting to hear that chanting or whispering again. Sometimes I'd wake up sweating, convinced I heard a murmur in my dreams. I'd walk to the studio, open the door, and check everything. Nothing changed, but I'd still feel that cold sensation on my arms. One afternoon, I played back the older recordings from before all this started. They sounded normal. No hidden voices or weird background rhythms. My music used to feel comfortable and warm. Now, every new track felt infected by something I couldn't explain. I considered bringing a friend over to listen, but I was worried they'd think I was messing with them. I also felt an odd dread about letting another person hear the recordings. It was like a voice in my head telling me not to involve anyone else. My heart would pound at the thought of bringing someone into the studio. I'd sweat just thinking about it. I tried to distract myself by playing simpler music. Maybe that would help. One day I turned on the recorder and started strumming a basic pattern. The next morning, I listened back. The voices were not as loud, but they were still there. They seemed to merge with my guitar chords, a muffled presence that clung to the notes. I felt my stomach twist. My teeth were clenched so hard my jaw ached. I rubbed my face and realized my cheeks were clammy. I wanted to erase the track, but I hesitated. Something made me want to keep it, to see if there was a pattern. I saved it anyway. Every time I tried to record, I sensed a force building up in the room. I can't describe it beyond a heavy feeling in the air and a spike in my heartbeat. I'd start playing and I'd feel a chill. My forehead would get sweaty, but I'd feel cold at the same time. My legs felt weak, and my hands got shaky. I'd force myself to keep going, but I couldn't help glancing at the corners of the room. Each time I'd replay the track, I'd brace myself for the whispers or that chanting. Sometimes I'd swear the voices got louder each time I played it. Other times they'd be quieter, like they were taunting me. I couldn't prove it. The waveforms didn't show a clear difference. But in my headphones, it felt different. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom one night because I kept hearing soft knocks on the studio door. I tried to ignore them, but they wouldn't stop. I walked over, opened the door, and found the studio empty. I checked the equipment. Everything was off. No lights, no gear, nothing. Yet I heard the knocks with my own ears. My heart pounded. My breath got shallow. I backed out of the room, closed the door, and sat in the living room staring at the door. It was quiet after that, but I didn't want to go back to bed. My body was shaking and I couldn't stop fidgeting. I stayed up until sunrise. The next night I forced myself to go back in and record, hoping I'd catch those knocks on the microphone. I left it running for a few hours while I was in the other room. When I checked the recording later, I didn't hear knocks. Instead, I heard slow, rhythmic beats. They lasted for about 20 seconds, paused, then repeated. My head felt light when I listened. I had to pause the playback and sit down. My stomach was in knots and I realized I was breathing hard. I tried to reason it away. Maybe it was the pipes in the walls. Maybe it was something outside. But it sounded so close to the microphone, like it was right next to it. I replayed it again and I thought I heard a short burst of whispering right in the middle of those beats. My eyes watered and I swallowed hard. I felt cold all over. By the end of that week, I developed a constant tension in my shoulders. My neck felt stiff. My back hurt from sleeping on the couch. I kept hearing little sounds in the corners of the apartment. Soft whispers, rustling, random thuds. My guitar sounded strange every time I tried to play something new. Even if I strummed one chord and let it ring, I'd hear a faint echo in the sustain. I felt my face get hot whenever that happened. My ears would ring afterward, and I'd sit there, unsure of what to do next. I tried to talk out loud in the studio once, just to see if I'd get a response. I said, "Is someone there?" The moment I stopped talking, I felt this wave of cold on my arms, like someone opened a freezer door. I held my breath, listening. I didn't hear a voice. I just felt a throb in my chest and my heart started beating faster. I rushed out of the studio and shut the door. I still haven't told anyone. I can't prove what's happening. There's no sign of forced entry or vandalism. I haven't found any hidden devices. I have no evidence that a neighbor is messing with me. I have these recordings, but I'm afraid to share them. I don't want anyone else to feel this pressure in their chest or those chills on their arms. Sometimes I wonder if I should just move. But this is my home and I don't want to abandon it over something I can't explain. Right now, I'm sitting here in my living room, staring at my closed studio door. My equipment is silent. The monitors are off. But I feel that same weight pressing on my chest. I feel a light tremor in my hands. I keep thinking I hear a faint whisper through the door, but I'm not sure if it's my mind playing tricks on me. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. My arms feel cold and the hair on them is standing up. My foot taps on the floor even though I try to stop. I feel cornered. I don't know how to make it leave. There's no sign that it wants to hurt me, but it's playing with my music. It keeps showing up in my tracks, weaving itself into my chords and rhythms, growing a little bolder each time. I don't know how far it will go. I plan to disconnect all my gear tomorrow. I'm not sure if that will help. Maybe I'll store my mics, my interface, everything. I'll leave my guitar in its case. I'll see if the silence makes a difference. Right now, I'm taking deep breaths, trying to calm down. My heart is still racing. I glance at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. The apartment is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I'm trying not to think about the next time I hear those whispers. I can still feel the sensation of something clinging to me, like a static charge that won't fade. I'm just waiting for it to happen again, and I know it will. I started walking at night because my mind wouldn't calm down during the day. I needed the quiet. I found this old park 3 weeks ago, tucked behind tall weeds and a rusty gate. I don't see many people out there, and the place feels abandoned. The first night I walked in, I heard an echo of wind hitting the old slides. It sounded hollow. I liked that I could hear my own footsteps on the cracked pavement. I'm a man in my early 30s. I moved to this neighborhood a few months ago. Work got stressful, and I needed some kind of outlet. I decided a late-night walk would help me breathe. I never thought I'd pick an abandoned park, but something about it felt right at first. It was quiet, and I assumed it would stay empty. I was wrong. I remember my first encounter with that strange figure. I had wandered past the broken seesaw and the rotted wooden bench. I saw him between the swings that night, standing there with his head tilted. The swings were old and covered in rust, so they made a soft squeak when the wind pushed them. I stopped a few feet away. My mind went blank. The man had no features on his face. It looked completely smooth, like he was wearing a skin-colored mask without holes. But it wasn't a mask, at least I didn't see any seams or lines. He had normal clothes on, dark pants, a hooded jacket, and boots. He stood still. I tried to ask if he was okay. My voice sounded shaky. I said, "Hey, do you need help?" He didn't speak. He moved away slowly, like he didn't want me to come closer. He stepped backward, 1 foot at a time, and then disappeared behind an old ticket booth or maintenance cabin. That place used to be one of those small sheds where a park caretaker might store equipment. Now it's just a locked box with peeling paint. I stood there, trying to figure out if I should follow him. My heart pounded. It felt like I was doing something wrong by even being there. I wiped sweat from my forehead and decided to see if he needed help. When I reached the corner of the cabin, I saw nothing. The walkway behind it was a dead end. I thought maybe he stepped behind a tree or hopped a fence, but I didn't hear any rustling leaves or chain links rattling. It was silent except for a faint sound, like heavy breathing. It was close, but I couldn't see him. I said, "Hello?" but got nothing back. I left the park after that. My skin felt cold, and I kept looking over my shoulder on the way home. I slept poorly that night. My dreams kept circling back to the sight of that smooth, blank face. The next evening, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. But around midnight, I found myself unlocking my front door and heading back there. I wanted answers, even though I felt uneasy. The streets were quiet, just a couple of cars passing by. The park's gate was still half open. I shoved it to slip through and it made a short screech. I walked in and looked around. The bench was still there, the seesaw was still tilted to one side, and the swings were gently moving in the breeze. I felt a chill even though it wasn't too cold. My breath came out slow and my heart started beating faster again. I walked along the cracked pavement and scanned the area. Nothing, no sign of anyone. I made my way to the far side of the park near that cabin. The door was locked with a rusty padlock. I tapped on it and it sounded hollow inside. I listened. No response. There wasn't any sign of forced entry or footprints that I could make out in the dirt. I circled back to the swings. When I got closer, I saw footprints in a patch of wet ground. They looked human, about the size of my own foot. I followed them with my eyes and they led me around the swing set, past the slide, and then toward a corner of the fence where there was no gate. I stood there studying the fence. It was tall with barbed wire on top. There was no clear hole in it. The footprints ended right at the fence. There was no exit. I looked around, felt the fence, tried to see if any part of it was loose. It wasn't. It was just solid old metal. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked over my shoulder, feeling exposed. I decided to leave. My legs felt tense and my palms were sweaty. On my way out, I kept staring at the shadows near the trees, expecting that man to pop out. But I saw no one. When I got home, I locked my door and double-checked my windows. I tried to push it out of my head, but I couldn't. On the third night, I hesitated. It was about 11 o'clock when I felt that pull to go back. I tried to ignore it, but around midnight I grabbed my jacket and headed out again. I told myself I just needed to see if the footprints were still there. I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. When I got to the park, it was dark as usual. A single streetlight flickered near the entrance, but otherwise it was shadows. I walked carefully, not wanting to make too much noise on the gravel. The wind rustled some branches near the perimeter. I saw the footprints again, and this time they were fresh. They seemed to have the same size and shape, leading from the gate to that same corner of the fence. My heart thumped. I felt my chest tighten, and I tried to calm my breathing. I walked alongside those prints, looking for signs of anyone around. The air felt heavy. I noticed I was clenching my fists, so I forced my hands open and tried to steady my nerves. When I reached the fence, the tracks ended again. There was nowhere to go but back. I felt something behind me. I spun around and saw a shadow near the swings. My throat went dry. It stood still, like it was watching me. I swallowed and forced myself to walk closer. I wanted to see if it was him. My chest felt hot, and each step made my stomach tighten. When I got closer, I saw the outline of a man. Then I saw that familiar blank face. My scalp tingled. He was standing there, breathing with a labored sound. It was the only noise I heard. The rest of the park felt muted. I took another step and he backed off again. He moved slowly, heading around the slide. I tried to keep some distance, but I didn't want to lose him. I said, "Hey, wait." But my voice came out shaky. He disappeared behind the slide and I hurried to catch a glimpse. My heart pounded, and I felt a bead of sweat run down my temple. When I reached the slide, he was gone. The area behind the slide was lit by a flickering streetlight, and I saw no one. The ground there was dry, so if he had walked that way, he should have left footprints. I saw nothing but cracked dirt and weeds. I glanced around, trying to see if maybe he crouched behind something. The cabin was about 10 yards away. I considered checking it again, but my gut told me to leave. My breathing was shallow, and my pulse was out of control. So I walked off. I felt exposed crossing the park's open space. I kept looking left and right, expecting him to be behind me. I got to the gate and practically squeezed through, not even bothering to close it. I went home and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, my heart still hammering hours later. The next few days, I tried to focus on work. My boss asked me why I looked tired. I told him I was just having trouble sleeping. He shook his head and told me to take it easy. I tried to avoid going back to the park, but my curiosity got the best of me a few nights later. I arrived close to 1 in the morning. The sky was clear, so I could see a bit better. The moonlight illuminated the broken benches and the twisted metal of the old rides. I stood at the entrance for a few seconds, listening for anything. I heard the usual breeze and the faint creak of the swings. I walked in slowly. My legs felt like they had weights attached to them. The place looked the same, but my senses felt sharper. I could smell the damp earth. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I reached the cabin. The padlock was still in place, but I noticed something new. A faint scuff mark on the door. It looked fresh. I knocked. My hand trembled. The sound of my knock felt too loud, echoing in the empty park. No answer. I walked around the cabin, stepping carefully, trying not to make noise. I saw footprints on the other side. They led to a chain-link fence. Again, there was no exit in that spot. Just the fence, tall and old, with no holes. I decided to check the interior of the park, near the slides and swings. I felt like I was being watched the entire time. The tension in my shoulders made them ache. I heard a sudden rustling behind me and spun around. My pulse jumped. I saw a figure near the gate this time. It stood still, facing me. The blank face almost reflected the moonlight. I couldn't see any eyes, nose, or mouth. I only knew he was facing me because his head was turned in my direction. I said, "Who are you?" My voice felt weak. He didn't answer. He stepped behind a large metal structure. I forced myself to move toward him. My feet felt heavy. When I reached the structure, he was gone. I felt a rush of anxiety. My arms felt numb, and I realized my nails were digging into my palms. I could still hear that sound. It was like labored breathing, almost a gasp. It seemed right behind me, but every time I turned, there was no one. I couldn't handle it. I jogged to the exit and left the park behind again. That's when it started affecting me more during the day. I kept seeing movement in the corner of my eye. I'd look and there'd be nothing. At work, I felt like someone was standing right behind me in the break room, but I'd turn around and find an empty spot. My nerves were shot. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a reaction to the stress. But then I found myself walking to the park again at night, like I was being pulled by an urge I couldn't shake. This time, I decided to bring a flashlight and a metal rod for some sense of security. It was around midnight again, and I entered the park with the flashlight in my left hand, the rod in my right. The beam of light illuminated the worn path. I saw scuff marks in the dirt, but not clear footprints. I passed the benches and swung the flashlight across the area. Nothing. When I reached the cabin, I felt the temperature drop a little. My breath got shallow, and I heard something move behind the cabin. I walked around to the back, flashlight raised. I saw a shape near the fence. Then I heard quick breaths, loud and raspy, almost a panting. I shouted, "Hey!" and aimed the light. The shape disappeared. I moved the light around, shining it on the fence. There were footprints in the loose dirt, leading to that same dead end. My palms were sweating around the rod, and my heart thumped in my chest. I felt cornered, so I backed up. The cabin was at my left, the fence at my right. I heard the breathing again, this time behind me. I spun and aimed the flashlight. I caught a glimpse of that blank face just a few feet away. It stood there, staring at me with no eyes. My scalp tingled and my stomach lurched. I staggered back, dropping the rod. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. My throat felt tight. He stood there, breathing heavily. Then he took a step forward. I scrambled backward, tripping over a loose board. I fell on my back, the flashlight clattering. The light went sideways, illuminating his lower body. He stood over me for a moment, then backed away. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight and sat up. He was gone. I scrambled to my feet. My knees shook. I looked around with the beam. Silence. No breathing. No figure. My chest burned from adrenaline. I forced myself to move, picking up the rod from the ground. I stumbled toward the gate, half expecting to see him blocking my path. I managed to get out of the park. On the sidewalk, I paced back and forth, trying to catch my breath. My eyes darted around, but I didn't see him anymore. After that, I told myself I needed a break. I stayed away for a solid week. My sleep got better, and I stopped jumping at shadows at work. But on the 8th night, I felt compelled to return. This time, I brought my phone for a video recording. I wanted proof. I wanted to show it to someone, see if I was losing my mind. I arrived around 1 in the morning, phone in hand, flashlight in my pocket. I pressed record before I walked in. The park was quiet. My footsteps sounded louder than usual. I scanned the swings and the slide. No one. I pointed my phone at the cabin area. Nothing at first. I moved slowly, feeling the crunch of gravel under my boots. I heard that breathing again, from the left side near the fence. My muscles tensed. I turned with the phone and tried to catch the figure on camera. I saw a shadow move. My heart hammered in my chest. I whispered, "I can hear you. Where are you?" I wasn't trying to be brave. I just wanted some kind of response. I saw him for a split second in my screen. A man with no face wearing that dark jacket standing about 20 feet away. I tried to zoom in. The phone started glitching. The screen froze, and I got a weird static noise. I looked up from the phone, and he was gone. I heard a sharp inhale behind me, and I spun around. Nobody was there. My breath came in shallow bursts, and my hands shook. I checked the phone, but the recording was corrupted. I felt a rush of frustration and fear. My mouth was dry. I decided to leave. I had enough. I headed toward the gate, phone still in my hand. I reached the entrance and paused to look back one last time. I saw movement by the swings. I recognized the shape of the man's shoulders, that blank face looking my way, illuminated by a faint glow from the streetlight outside. My heart slammed in my chest. I stepped out of the park and shut the gate behind me. I decided not to open it again. I went home, locked my door, and sat down on my couch. My palms were still sweaty, and I felt a dull ache in my legs from the tension. I tried to replay everything in my mind, but I couldn't explain how he kept vanishing. The footprints leading to the fence still bothered me. The locked cabin also made no sense. I had no answers. Since then, I've stayed away. I still see faint footprints in my nightmares, leading me to dead ends. I hear that raspy breathing when I wake up in the middle of the night, but I haven't gone back to the park. I don't plan to. I don't want to see that faceless man again. Sometimes I think I hear the squeak of those rusted swings in the distance, but maybe it's just my imagination. Even so, I keep the doors locked now, and I've found other ways to clear my head that don't involve abandoned places or silent figures. I've told no one about it in person. I don't need more people thinking I'm crazy, but if you ever find yourself near that old park late at night, be careful. You might see footprints leading to nowhere, and you might hear a heavy breathing in the dark. I won't be there again. I'm done. I never thought my obsession with antiques would push me into this bizarre situation. I was just drawn to the craft and the history behind old pieces. I liked the feel of heavy metal and worn edges. But ever since I brought that pocket watch home from the bazaar, everything in my house has started to feel wrong. The clocks won't stay put, the walls vibrate at odd times, and every midnight drags me into a suffocating cycle that makes me question my own grip on reality. I don't see ghosts or anything like that, but I feel something. It's cold, and it mumbles words I can't grasp. And now, no matter how hard I try, I can't escape these twisted hours. It's like the house doesn't want me to leave. I'm going to explain what's been going on, and I won't hold anything back. The day I got the watch, I was on my way home from an antiques bazaar on the other side of town. The place was packed with old furniture, dusty lamps, chipped porcelain, and a bunch of other trinkets that didn't catch my eye. But then I saw this watch. It was in a corner booth, surrounded by junk. It looked tarnished, and the cover had some faint engraving that I couldn't fully make out. I asked the vendor about it. He shrugged and said he didn't know its origins, just that it was old. I liked how heavy it felt in my hand, so I bought it without much thought. The drive home seemed ordinary enough. I had the watch in my cup holder, and I heard it ticking now and then, even though I couldn't figure out how to open it to wind it. When I reached my house, I placed it on the kitchen table, intending to clean it later. I remember feeling uneasy for a second, but I assumed I was just tired. My house is pretty big, with a living room, a small study where I keep my antique collection, a bedroom, and a guest room I rarely use. It's quiet, and I like it that way. Later that evening, I sat down on my couch and flipped through a magazine. After a while, I heard a strange ticking sound. It wasn't coming from the watch on the table. It sounded like it came from every direction at once. I stood up, looked around, and realized the clock on the wall was fast. My digital clock near the TV showed a different time altogether. The watch in my kitchen seemed to be ticking at its own pace. I checked the microwave's clock, and that was yet another time. They were all different, and the second hands on the analog clocks weren't synchronized. One clock ticked forward, and the other seemed to be stuck for a few seconds and then lurched ahead. The digital displays flickered. I felt a burst of adrenaline, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe there was a power surge. Maybe the batteries in the clocks were dying. I swapped batteries, reset times, and tried to move on. I went to bed around 11 p.m. or what I assumed was 11 p.m. because the times were all messed up. I felt restless and sweaty, as if the air was heavier than usual. My bedroom has a small clock radio, and it glowed an eerie red. I got up and unplugged it, thinking maybe I'd just rely on my phone alarm for the night. Then I heard a faint hum through the walls. It was like a deep vibration, not loud, but enough to make me feel tense. I laid back down and tried to focus on the sound of my breathing, hoping to calm myself. A few minutes later, I heard a chime echo through the house. It sounded like a grandfather clock, but I don't own one. The wood in the walls seemed to carry the vibration like a dull thumping. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked into the hallway. The air felt cold against my arms. The lights flickered for a moment, but then stayed on. I heard another chime, louder this time, and it felt like it came from the living room. My footsteps were slow, and each step made the floorboards creak. I reached the living room and saw nothing out of place, except for the wall clock. The hands were spinning, shifting forward a few hours, then back. I stared at it, wondering if I was losing it. The temperature dropped again, and I felt a chill run from my legs up to my shoulders. That's when I heard a low whisper. It didn't sound like a language I recognized. It was more like broken words, or maybe words spoken backward. I couldn't make sense of it, but I thought I heard something about time or hours. My heart hammered, my forehead was damp, my stomach tightened. I looked around, expecting to see someone, but I was alone. I felt pinned in place for a few seconds, my breathing rapid. When it passed, I ran back to my bedroom, shut the door, and turned on every light. I grabbed the watch from the kitchen on my way, thinking maybe I should inspect it. It was warm to the touch, which was strange because I'd left it on a cool table. I pushed on the cover looking for a way to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I felt a buzzing sensation in my fingers when I held it. Finally, I gave up and placed it on my nightstand, hoping I'd figure it out in the morning. I barely slept. Every hour or so, I heard a faint chime. Sometimes it was one ring, sometimes it was several. The room felt stuffy, despite the cold air hitting me every now and then. My dreams were fragmented images of clocks, gears, and swirling numbers. I woke up around what I guessed was 7 a.m., but I wasn't sure. My phone said 7:02, but my wristwatch said 5:47. I checked the living room, and the wall clock showed 3:00. The microwave said 10:15. I laughed nervously, feeling the tension in my chest. I reset them all again, but within minutes they started shifting. That entire day I felt on edge. The watch in my pocket seemed to vibrate whenever I passed by any other clock in the house. I tried to focus on normal chores like doing laundry and cleaning my living room, but the different times everywhere kept throwing me off. I heard random ticks and clangs from the corners of the house. Each time, I paused and stared around, waiting for something to jump out at me. Nothing did, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Around midday, I decided to leave the house for a bit. I wanted some fresh air and maybe a break from this weirdness. I grabbed my car keys and the old watch. When I opened the front door, I saw the bright daylight, but the watch in my hand showed an odd hour that made no sense. I pushed it aside, locked the house, and got in my car. It was a relief just to hear the steady hum of the engine. I drove around the block thinking I'd go to a local cafe to clear my head, but something nagged at me. I felt a pressure in my skull, like a headache coming on. Then I noticed my car's digital clock. It flickered, jumped forward by 2 hours, then blinked out. I cursed under my breath. I drove to the cafe anyway. I sat in a corner seat, checked my phone for the correct time, and tried to relax. For a while, I felt okay. The cafe was busy, but the normalcy of it all was comforting. Nobody else seemed to have clocks going haywire. Nobody looked spooked. I finished my coffee, then tried to go home, determined to figure out what was happening. The second I stepped back into my house, I felt the air get colder again. My skin prickled, and I noticed the living room clock was now showing a time from the day before. The seconds hand jerked back and forth. I tried to rip it off the wall, wanting to toss it out or remove the batteries, but the second I touched it, I felt a sharp shock in my fingers. I yanked my hand back. My palm tingled for a few seconds, so I turned away and went into my study. I have shelves of old books, small statuettes, and a couple of old clocks. One is a brass clock from the early 1900s, and the other is a wooden mantel clock. I checked them both. They were showing completely random times, and their ticking was out of sync. Usually they're quiet unless they need winding, but now they seem to be ticking and chiming in short bursts, almost like coughing fits. I realized that every clock in the house, from the cheap plastic one in the garage to the decorative ones in the study, had a mind of its own. I looked at the old pocket watch again. It felt heavier than before, like it was made of solid lead. The ticking inside was faster now. I pressed my thumb against the cover, and for a second I thought I heard a click, but it still wouldn't open. My heartbeat sped up, and I slammed the watch on the table in frustration. It bounced once but didn't get damaged. It landed face down, ticking away like normal. That evening I tried to calm myself by cooking dinner and watching some TV, but I noticed the TV guide information was messed up. Shows that should have aired hours earlier were listed as up next. The entire house felt off balance. The floor creaked under my feet, and sometimes I heard a long groan from the walls. I flipped channels, trying to distract myself, but my eyes kept drifting to the watch on the coffee table. Around 10 p.m., I turned off the TV and stared at the dark reflection in the black screen. I looked drained. My eyes had dark circles and my hair was disheveled. I decided I should try to sleep early, hoping the next day would be better. I set my phone alarm for 6 a.m., placed it next to me, and lay in bed. At first, everything was quiet. I was about to doze off when the first chime rattled through the walls. It wasn't a soft ring. It was a deep, dull clang that sent vibrations through the wooden paneling. My nightstand shook slightly. I opened my eyes wide, my pulse racing. Then the second chime struck, making my bedside lamp vibrate. I sat up, pressing my hand against the wall. I felt the tremor move through my fingers. Midnight must have come, or at least I assumed it was midnight. The cold air got denser, and I saw my breath in front of me. My shoulders trembled. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak. That's when I heard the whisper again, louder than before. The words were jumbled, but I understood something like time and gone in the mix. I froze. My scalp tingled and my gut twisted. I wanted to tell it to leave me alone, but my throat felt tight. I forced myself to move toward the bedroom door. I stepped into the hallway. I could see my own breath under the overhead light. The entire corridor felt like a freezer. Each step caused the floorboards to pop and groan. A sudden crack behind me made me jump. I spun around, but nothing was there. Then I heard that whisper again, but this time it sounded closer to my ear. My jaw clenched. I backed up against the wall, listening to my heart hammer in my chest. I whispered to myself to stay calm. Then the presence seemed to recede, leaving the air slightly warmer. I hurried back into the bedroom and shut the door. I pushed a heavy dresser against it, not caring how stupid it looked. I needed to feel some sort of barrier. I turned on every light in the room, then noticed the watch on the nightstand. The ticking was irregular, speeding up, slowing down, then speeding again. I wanted to toss it out the window, but I worried it might make everything worse. I had this strange sense that the house and the watch were connected. Maybe throwing it away would break the cycle, or maybe it would set off something else. I felt stuck. The next few days followed the same pattern. Every morning the clocks were out of sync. Every evening I heard random chimes, and every midnight I felt that cold presence whispering about time. My appetite shrank. I paced around the house a lot, checking my phone for the correct time, hoping it didn't start glitching too. For some reason, my phone stayed accurate as long as I was outside. But the second I stepped back inside, the phone's display sometimes jumped an hour forward or backward. I tried leaving the house overnight, booking a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I packed a small bag, took my phone charger, and left the watch on the kitchen table. When I got to the motel, I felt a wave of relief. I spent the evening watching local news, ordering takeout, and flipping through random channels. I felt almost normal. Around midnight, I noticed the motel room's clock blinked once, but it stayed correct. I fell asleep without hearing chimes. In the morning, I headed back, hoping maybe the house had reset. As soon as I unlocked the door, I saw that the watch was gone from the kitchen table. I panicked, searching everywhere until I found it sitting on my living room coffee table instead. I don't remember putting it there. My nerves shot up, and I felt lightheaded. The living room clock was spinning in circles, making a faint buzzing sound. I stepped outside again, trying to breathe, but something pulled me back in like an invisible tug. I couldn't just abandon the house. My entire life is here, and I haven't really done anything that would justify leaving for good. And besides, the door locks behind me, and it feels like the house expects me to return. Now each night at midnight, I get the same cold presence. The walls vibrate with every chime, and I stand there bracing myself. I don't see any figure. I just feel that chill, and I hear those broken words. They seem to be about lost hours or moments that can't be reclaimed. I stay awake longer and longer, feeling drained when the sun comes up, though I can't trust the clocks to tell me when that actually is. Sometimes I catch myself counting the seconds, but they always slip away. I've tried to break open the watch, thinking maybe I could remove its gears or stop its mechanism, but it stays sealed. I tried smashing it with a hammer in my garage. The metal didn't even scratch. The hammer's head bounced off with a sharp clang, which echoed across the concrete floor. My ears rang for a minute afterward. It felt like the watch was made of an alloy I've never seen before, and the ticking inside refused to stop. I've also tried resetting every clock in the house at once, removing batteries, unplugging digital devices, and even turning off the main power breaker. But every time I power things back on, the clocks eventually go out of alignment again. Sometimes they show the correct time for a few minutes, teasing me into thinking I've fixed it, but then they drift, and the watch itself never fails to keep some kind of schedule, though it's not a normal schedule I can decipher. My heartbeat is constantly elevated. I sweat through my shirts even if the air is cold. My eyelids feel heavy, but I can't rest easy. I keep listening for the next chime, the next shift in the clocks. I thought about calling friends, but what would I say? My clocks are spinning and my house is whispering? It sounds ridiculous, and it's not like anything is physically harming me. I'm just stuck. It's as if the house is holding me in this cycle, preventing me from leaving for good, but not hurting me. Now, as I sit in my living room, I watch the watch on the table. The second hand inside moves too fast. The living room clock on the wall shows some random time. The digital clock on the cable box flickers. My phone on the coffee table has gone black, refusing to show me anything. I feel the floor vibrating under my feet. It's a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, but not mine. I realize that another midnight is close. The temperature in the room is dropping, and I see my breath again. My shoulders tense up and my jaw clenches. I'm bracing for the whisper, for that sudden drop in pressure that makes my ears pop, and for the feeling that something is watching me. I don't know if it will ever end. I just know I can't escape. Every time I try, I end up right back here feeling the same claustrophobic pull. No matter how many times I reset the clocks, time doesn't line up in this house. Nothing final or fatal happens to me. I just live through the same routine, different times on every device, random chimes, vibrations in the walls, and a midnight presence that breathes cold air across my skin. I can't see a way out, and I can't pretend it's not happening. Right now, I'm just waiting for the next chime. I feel a numbness in my legs. My pulse is racing in my ears. The watch is ticking faster, almost in sync with my heart. I don't know how long I can take this, but I also know it won't kill me. It's just keeping me trapped, making sure I never break free from this endless loop of broken hours. That's the truth of my life now. All because I bought a damn old watch at a bazaar. And I see no sign that it will ever let me go. I noticed something strange about that road the first time I saw it, and I can't shake the feeling that I stumbled onto something I shouldn't have. I travel to my parents' place every weekend, always taking the same highway. It's a boring stretch of road most of the time. I see the same mile markers and the same signs, and I know exactly where to slow down for cops and where to speed up a little. But one night, I saw a narrow lane running parallel to the main road. It looked out of place, like a beaten path that might have been carved out by a service truck or maybe some local people who wanted a shortcut. I didn't pay much attention at first because I was in a hurry to get home. The next weekend, though, it was still there. Same angle, same spot, like it was inviting me in. I'm usually not superstitious, but there was something about how that road just appeared out of nowhere that kept bugging me. I decided I'd try it sooner or later just to see if it led somewhere useful. The weekend after that, I drove out late at night to avoid traffic. I wanted to get to my folks' house early the next morning. Around midnight, I passed the spot where that narrow lane started. The moon was out, and it lit up the entrance just enough for me to see the first few feet of pavement. It looked smooth and seemed well maintained. There were no signs, no lights, nothing to indicate it was a real road. Yet it felt like it was calling me. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. My legs felt a bit tense, and I noticed I was grinding my teeth. Part of me thought I should just keep driving, but I pulled over, checked my mirrors, and turned onto that lane. The first few hundred yards weren't bad. I figured it was maybe some service road or a maintenance route. The pavement was solid, no potholes and no debris. The trees on both sides were thick, though. There was barely a shoulder. Tall pines stretched up, blocking out most of the light from the moon. The night air was warm, but my arms prickled with goosebumps. I turned off my radio to listen. I thought I might hear crickets or night birds, but it was quiet except for my engine. The hum of my tires on the pavement sounded louder than it should have, like the road was amplifying it. I cracked my window to see if I could smell anything. All I caught was the faint scent of damp leaves. Everything felt very still. After about a mile, the road took a sharp curve. I slowed down and carefully eased around the bend. My headlights lit up the trees ahead, and I saw the lane narrow further. Branches on both sides scraped at my door panels as I inched forward. My heart was beating fast. I kept wondering if maybe I should reverse and go back to the main highway, but the lane still seemed passable, and part of me wanted to see where it ended. My chest felt tight. I was on edge because there were no signs of life. No other cars, no houses, no lights. Then, after maybe another quarter mile, I saw it just stop. The pavement ended abruptly, like whoever built this lane just gave up. Past that, there was a cluster of trees twisted together, forming an arch of branches. They looked so knotted that I couldn't see through to the other side. I pressed the brakes and stared for a moment. I considered getting out, but it was pitch dark and those trees looked unwelcoming. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, which made me realize how quiet it had been before. I felt a twinge in my stomach, that uneasy feeling you get when you know something's not right. I sighed, put the car in reverse, and started backing up slowly. But I wasn't seeing the road behind me. It was like I was just on a narrow dirt path. I tried to straighten out and look for a space to do a three-point turn. My headlights swept across the trees, and I realized I didn't see the paved lane anymore. My chest got tight, and my palms started sweating. I pulled forward just a bit, then reversed again, but the path was gone. I was staring at overgrown ground and thick underbrush. I couldn't believe it. I shut off my engine for a moment and took a few deep breaths. The only light was from my headlights. The night was so dark that it felt like a blanket over the whole area. My eyes flicked around the scene in front of me, searching for the asphalt. I got out of the car with a flashlight to check, hoping that maybe I'd just turned too sharply. The flashlight flickered across the ground, revealing gravel and dead leaves. No pavement. The sound of my own footsteps on the leaves felt too loud. My breathing got heavier. My ears were straining for any sound that might explain what was going on. I got back in the car, turned the wheel a bit, and tried to find an angle that would bring me back to the highway. I drove for a few minutes over bumpy terrain, certain that I'd pop a tire or get stuck on a rock. Trees loomed on both sides. They seemed thicker than before. Everything looked the same. My stomach churned. I felt a knot in my throat. Every time my headlights washed over the trunks, I had the sensation that I was going in circles. There were no markers, nothing to guide me. I checked my phone and found no signal. I tossed it onto the passenger seat in frustration. I kept driving for what felt like an hour. The tension in my shoulders was getting worse. My eyes started aching from staring so hard into the dark. The clock on my dashboard read 12:23 a.m. when I first turned onto the lane. After all that time driving in circles, it read 12:31 a.m. That made no sense. I felt like I'd been in this forest for half the night. My chest tightened more, and I tried to force myself to stay calm. I told myself it had to be some weird glitch with my clock, or maybe I was so panicked that my perception of time was off. Eventually, I saw a break in the trees. It looked like a narrow gap, maybe wide enough for my car. I turned my wheel and squeezed through, scraping the sides of my car against the undergrowth. When I cleared that patch, my headlights illuminated the same stretch of highway I'd left behind. It was quiet, not a single car in sight. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I pulled onto the shoulder, put the car in park, and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. I felt sweat trickling down my temple. My breathing was rapid. I stayed there for a while, letting myself settle down. When I finally looked at the time again, it was still 12:31 a.m. At that point, I couldn't handle thinking about why that was happening. I pulled back onto the highway and drove toward my parents' place in a daze. The rest of the drive felt unnaturally short. I usually spend about an hour on that last stretch, but it went by in 10 minutes. I arrived at their house, got out, and noticed the clock still showed 12:31. I checked my phone and it said 1:45 a.m. The realization made me freeze. My phone had the correct time, but my car clock was stuck. I reset it, but it wouldn't budge. I turned off the engine, turned it back on, and it finally jumped to 1:46 a.m. My parents came out to greet me. They said I looked pale, like I was sick. I told them I was tired and just needed to lie down. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing the rustle of leaves and the crunch of gravel under my tires. I got up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. My eyes darted around the guest room, trying to see if the walls were closing in. That night set the tone for every night since. For the last couple of months, I've been having nightmares about that strange road. In these dreams, I'm back in my car, turning onto that narrow lane. Everything's dark. The trees swallow the light from my headlights. I see the arch of twisted branches at the end, but this time, it's always just out of reach. I keep driving toward it, but the road stretches on and on. My chest feels like it's going to explode. My hands grip the wheel so hard I can't unclench my fingers. Then I wake up drenched in sweat, with my heart pounding. During the day, I try to convince myself that it was just a weird experience, maybe an overactive imagination combined with exhaustion. But every time I drive back to my parents', I see that spot on the highway, and the narrow lane is there. It looks exactly the same. Sometimes I think about checking it out in daylight, but my stomach tightens at the thought. I picture myself getting stuck again, driving in circles for hours. My gut twists, and my hands start to tremble. So I keep going. I don't take that exit. I try to focus on the main road. But I catch glimpses of that path in my peripheral vision. It feels wrong to look directly at it, like if I do, I might get pulled in again. I checked local maps and Google satellite images to see if there was some explanation. None of them show a second road where I saw it. There's just forest. A few times I parked nearby and walked around the general area, but I only found thick brush. It all looked normal. I didn't see any sign of a paved lane. No tire tracks, no break in the trees. Nothing. That's when I started losing sleep. I'd lie awake, replaying the events. The memory of searching for a way out, the panic in my chest, the sweat on my face, it all kept coming back. I'd hear faint scratching at the edges of my memory, like branches scraping metal. My arms would break out in goosebumps. I'd sit up and look out the window, half expecting to see that arch of twisted trees in my backyard. I tried talking to a neighbor who's lived in the area a long time. He told me there's no second road, just the main highway and a few dirt trails for hunting. That's all. He said if I saw something else, maybe it was a private driveway hidden in the forest. But none of the homeowners around there have a driveway that opens onto the highway like that. Plus, the pavement I drove on was smooth, almost new. I felt a rush of anxiety explaining it. My neighbor gave me a strange look, like he thought I was messing with him. After that, I stopped bringing it up to other people. On the surface, my life hasn't changed much. I still go to work, I still visit my parents on weekends, and I still drive the same route. But every time I pass that spot, I get this tightness in my chest. My eyes flick to the trees to see if the lane is there. It always is, waiting for me. My nights are broken up by those nightmares. I see the road twisting like a snake, and I know if I drive in too far, I won't get out. Then I wake up shaking. My sheets are soaked with sweat, and I can't catch my breath. My mind starts racing, and it takes me hours to fall back asleep. I haven't gone back onto that second road, and I don't plan to. But it follows me in my head. When I'm awake, I think about how real it was. The solid feel of the pavement, the way the branches tore at my car. I had scratches on the paint the next morning to prove it. There's no question I was actually there. It wasn't a dream. Yet I can't explain how it vanished or how I ended up back on the highway with no time lost. That's the worst part. When I first noticed the clock in my car was stuck, I felt this jolt of confusion. It's like I bent reality or something, but I don't want to dwell on that. I just want to keep my head down and keep driving past that spot without looking. My dreams still bring me back to that place. In them, I feel the same panic, the same helplessness. The road is like a maze, shifting and preventing me from finding a way out. I wake up with a pounding heart, struggling to remember that I'm safe in bed. Sometimes I think about selling my car and getting a new one, maybe changing my routine and traveling a different route altogether. But I know that wouldn't solve anything. The road is in my memory, locked in. I can't just drive away from what I experienced. It's there, waiting, and I don't have a good explanation. Every time I pass that spot, I hold my breath and grip the wheel. I drive a little faster, trying to keep my eyes straight ahead. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of the narrow entrance in my side mirror. My throat goes dry, and I feel a trickle of sweat on my back. I tighten my jaw and force my gaze forward. That's my story. It's nothing dramatic in terms of violence or anything like that, but it keeps me awake at night. It might not sound like a big deal if you haven't been there yourself, but I still feel a jolt of fear whenever I think about turning onto that road again. Even in the daylight, I wouldn't do it. Not after what I felt that night, driving around in circles, seeing no exit, and then popping out onto the highway like no time had passed. Something about that place isn't natural. The nightmares haven't stopped, and I don't think they ever will. It's inside my head now, like I left part of my sanity on that narrow lane. And that's what haunts me more than anything else. Knowing that there are places in the world that don't follow the rules, and once you step into them, you can't pretend they aren't real. I've tried to forget, but the memory always comes back. And the road is always there, waiting. I still remember the first time I noticed it. I was sitting in my office, a small room in my house where I keep my desk, computer, and a few shelves. I had a bright lamp on the desk, and the overhead light was off. I looked up for a moment to stretch my neck, and I saw my shadow on the wall. It didn't match the position of my arms. I was sitting there, but the shadow's arms looked too long, and its head was slightly slanted. At first, I thought it was some trick of the lighting. I stood up, walked to the wall, and waved my hand. The shadow waved too, but it felt out of sync. I got a heavy feeling in my stomach right then. My palms started to sweat, and I felt my heart pounding faster. I tried to stay calm. I switched on the overhead light and moved the desk lamp. The shadow shifted as well, but it still didn't seem to align with my exact posture. That was the beginning. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I have a lot of work to do, and I hate distractions. I handle administrative tasks for a small business, so I spend hours typing reports, sending emails, and organizing files. I told myself I was just tired, maybe a bit stressed. But every time I entered that office, I could see the shadow acting strange. Sometimes it looked like it was leaning forward even though I was leaning back in my chair. Other times, it looked shorter or shaped differently around the shoulders. I kept feeling an uncomfortable tingle in my skin whenever I glanced at it. I can't describe it as pain. It felt more like pins and needles. My arms would get goosebumps, and I would get that tight sensation in my chest that reminded me of mild panic attacks I've had in the past. I started leaving the door open, thinking more light from the hallway might help. One afternoon, I got up to grab a glass of water. The sun was bright, and the curtains were pulled back. My shadow was on the floor near the desk. I checked it before leaving, and it looked normal. I walked out, down the hall, got my water, and came back. The shadow was stretched across the wall now, like it had shifted several feet. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I looked at myself, at my feet, and at the light source. It didn't make sense for the shadow to be that far from where I stood. My heart rate sped up. My hands shook as I set my glass on the desk. I stepped around the room testing angles. The shadow moved, but not the way I expected. Sometimes it seemed to pause half a second behind my steps. I felt a knot in my throat. I shut the blinds to see if that would fix the problem, but the shadow still looked wrong under the ceiling light. I decided to sit down and focus on my work, ignoring it. I forced myself to keep my eyes on my computer screen. My stomach churned. I tried taking a few deep breaths. That night I couldn't sleep well. I kept replaying those moments in my mind. My back felt tense and I tossed and turned until around 3 in the morning. I decided to get up and check the office just to prove to myself that I was getting worked up over nothing. I walked down the hallway, turned on the light, and stared at the wall. At that hour there was no sunlight, just the overhead light in the office. My shadow stood next to me on the wall, but the top of its head looked almost sloped, and one arm appeared longer than the other. I felt my breathing get shallow. My hands started to sweat again. I moved my arm up and down. The shadow did follow, but the shape still looked skewed. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I backed out of the room, closed the door, and rushed back to my bedroom. I left the hallway light on. The next morning, I drank 2 cups of coffee to shake off the fatigue. I sat at my desk again and tried to act normal. I noticed I was more aware of every shift in light. My eyes darted between the monitor and the wall. Every little movement of my body felt awkward, as if I was afraid to see what the shadow would do. At one point, I leaned forward to check a document, and my shadow seemed to remain sitting upright for a moment before it slowly matched my posture. I felt my throat tighten. My heart pounded so loud that I heard the pulse in my ears. I sat there, staring, waiting for it to happen again. It felt like my body was trembling, especially my legs. I considered turning off the lamp, but then the overhead light would throw a single large shadow behind me anyway. I considered leaving the room to work in the living room, but my computer and files are all set up in the office. So I stayed, forcing myself to push through each hour, pretending I could cope. By the end of that day, I felt exhausted. My eyes burned from straining. My head ached. My shoulders were stiff. My desk phone rang a few times, and I jumped with each ring because I was already on edge. That evening, I decided to push my chair to a corner and place a bright floor lamp behind me. The idea was to create a shadow directly in front of me, so I could keep an eye on it. The shadow was there, but it didn't match my outline the way it should. The arms looked overly long, like they touched the floor when I was seated. My real arms were on the desk. I slowly lifted my right hand. The shadow's right hand moved a moment later, but the shape of the fingers looked oddly pointed. My scalp tingled. A warm wave of fear washed through my body. I turned off the lamp. Then I got up and left the room. I sat in the living room, lights on, and tried to watch something on TV to distract myself. My thoughts wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about what I had seen. I felt a constant heaviness in my chest, and my neck muscles were tense. Every so often I glanced at the walls around me, checking for a shadow that shouldn't be there. My stomach felt uneasy, and I couldn't eat dinner. I ended up pacing around the house. I inspected each room, looking at the light fixtures, the windows, and the angles of the walls. Everything looked normal. When I got back to the office, I paused at the doorway and flicked on the light. The shadow was right where I would expect it to be, but I didn't trust it anymore. I felt like it was waiting for me to let my guard down. I felt a prickle of sweat on my back. I turned the light off and walked away. For the next few days, I worked at odd times, sometimes early in the morning or late at night, when I felt slightly calmer. I tried to keep multiple lights on to blend all the shadows together, hoping I wouldn't notice anything unusual. But one afternoon, I was scanning some documents in a hurry. I had left the blinds open for natural light. I placed a stack of papers on my desk and bent down to pick up a dropped pen. As I stood up, I saw my shadow on the side wall. It looked like it was crouching, even though I was fully upright. My chest constricted. I let out a small gasp. My mouth went dry. I stared at it for a moment. My shadow slowly straightened, catching up to my posture. I broke out in a cold sweat. My thoughts raced. I wanted to run out of the room, but I needed to finish scanning. I told myself I could manage if I just stayed focused for a few minutes. While I waited for the scanner to process, I forced myself to keep my eyes on the computer. I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears. My neck felt stiff. My breathing was shallow. I tried to ignore the wall, but my peripheral vision kept catching a hint of movement. It felt like the shadow was shifting from side to side. My head felt light. I started to think about whether I should call someone or ask for help, but then I remembered how crazy this would sound. It's a shadow, not a person. It's not physically threatening me, but I still felt hunted. Later that night, I tried to unwind with some music in the living room. I even turned on a bright overhead light there. No strange shadows showed up. I started to relax a bit, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Then I heard a faint thump from the office. It sounded like something brushing against the desk or the chair. My skin crawled, my heartbeat jumped again. I got up, walked slowly down the hallway, and peeked inside. The chair was slightly turned, but that might have been my imagination. The shadow behind the desk didn't look right. It seemed broader, like it had grown shoulders. I stood there, holding my breath. The overhead light was on, but I couldn't see any reason for the shape to look that wide. I flicked the switch on and off. The shadow flickered each time, but it maintained that odd shape. I tried to steady my breathing. My mind raced with questions. I backed out of the room again, switched off the light, and pulled the door shut. I barely slept that night. I tossed and turned, feeling tightness in my chest. I kept expecting to see the shadow slip under my bedroom door or appear on the ceiling. The house felt too quiet. Every little sound made me jump. I think I got maybe an hour of sleep before sunrise. In the morning, I felt groggy and irritable. I walked to the office, determined to take care of my work as fast as possible. I opened the door. The room smelled a bit stale, like it hadn't been aired out. I turned on all the lights. The shadow was in its usual place, stretched on the floor and part of the wall. As I moved around to my desk, I realized its head looked slightly lower, as if it was hunched. I tested it by raising my chin. My real head moved up. The shadow's head stayed in a lowered position for a split second before it adjusted. My stomach flipped. I wanted to slam the door and walk away, but I had deadlines. I sat down, turned my monitor on, and tried to focus. My muscles felt stiff. My heart was pounding. My eyes felt dry. Every time I glanced to the side, I could see the shadow's arms. They looked too long again. At one point, I leaned back and stared directly at the shadow. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. My mouth felt sour. My forehead broke into a cold sweat. I wished I could talk to someone about it, but I wasn't sure how to explain it. I felt stuck in that room. I typed as fast as I could, finishing email after email. The entire time, I felt a constant tension in my back. Sometimes I heard what sounded like a faint rustling near the corner where the shadow fell. I couldn't tell if it was just my imagination. By late afternoon, I closed my laptop and decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my phone and left the office. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. My chest felt tight. My mind was racing, but I tried to breathe slowly. After a few minutes, I went back, turned off the office lights, and locked the door from the inside. I have a small key for that door, in case I need to lock it when I'm away. Now, it's locked. I'm not sure if that helps, but it gives me a small sense of security. I still feel uneasy in my own home, but I can't stand looking at that shadow anymore. I'm scared that if I let it hang around without locking the door, it might do something I can't predict. Sometimes I hear faint sounds coming from the office, like little bumps or knocks against the wall. It keeps me on edge. I don't know if this is temporary, or if it'll get worse. I sit on my couch now, thinking about that moment I first realized my shadow wasn't synced with my movements. I felt fear then, but it was nothing compared to what I feel now. I keep noticing the tightness in my shoulders, the heaviness in my stomach, and the sweaty palms. I can't focus on normal things. I keep expecting the shadow to appear somewhere else in the house, maybe around a corner or under a door. But so far, it stays in the office. For now, I'm trying to ignore it. I don't know what else to do. I can't bring myself to go back in there unless I absolutely have to. I'm hoping that maybe with time, it'll go away on its own. But every time I think about opening that door, I feel a cold rush of dread. My arms tense up, and I can't take another step. I just stand there, listening for any sound inside. Sometimes I swear I hear a soft scraping, like something sliding across the floor. I'm not sure how long I can live like this. But I know one thing. I can't ignore what I've seen. My shadow isn't following the normal rules of light and movement. It feels like it's trying to get out, trying to break free from the wall and floor. And I don't know what will happen if it ever does. For now, I keep that door locked, and I try not to think about it. But it's always there in the back of my mind. That's my reality at this moment. I don't have a plan beyond shutting that door and hoping the shadow stays where it is. I can't see a way to fix it. And I can't keep pretending it's just in my head because I've seen it clear as day. That's all I can do right now. Stay out of that room and try to keep calm.